In Riverton, silence was never safety. It was the deadliest lie of all. And when the truth finally spoke, it demanded blood before it gave answers. You are listening to Dark Pulse, your home for true crime thrillers and suspense stories. Tell us in the comments, you're watching this story from where and at what time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling mysteries. The Final Confession. Unsolved murder mystery that shook America. The rain had not stopped for 3 days in Riverton, a quiet suburban town in Pennsylvania. The streets smelled of wet asphalt. The neon signs of diners flickered in the storm, and the river that cut through the town swelled dangerously close to its banks. People stayed indoors, the kind of storm that pressed silence on a place already heavy with secrets. And then, the silence was broken. On a Thursday night just after midnight, the body of Emily Hartman was found near the old railway bridge on the edge of town. Emily, 32, a woman with sharp words and sharper eyes, had been the kind of person everyone knew yet no one truly understood. Some said she was too nosy for her own good. Others said she was a lonely truth seeker who never stopped digging into the shadows of Riverton. But that night she was no longer the woman who asked hard questions. She was the first victim in what the media would soon call the shadow murders. 2 teenagers sneaking out from a late party stumbled upon her. At first, they thought she was just a drunk woman collapsed near the bridge. But when the lightning split the sky, they saw the blood pooling into the mud, rainwater carrying streaks of red down into the river. The teens called 911, trembling, voices cracked with fear. By the time Detective Mark Sullivan arrived, the storm had swallowed most of the evidence. Sullivan was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, weary eyes, a detective who had seen too much and trusted too little. Standing beside him was his new partner, Detective Lena Morales, fresh from the academy, eager but green. Sullivan knelt by Emily's body. The rain soaked his trench coat, but he didn't care. What struck him first wasn't just the brutality, the wound across her temple, the bruises around her throat, but the expression frozen on her face. Emily looked terrified, as though she had seen the killer coming and recognized them. The call to Emily's family was one Sullivan dreaded. The Hartmans were old Riverton blood, rich, polished, respected in public, but whispered about in every corner. Richard Hartman, the father, ran a construction business with government contracts. His handshake was firm, but his reputation carried whispers of fraud and mob ties. Margaret Hartman, the mother, dressed in pearls even at breakfast, obsessed with image, obsessed with keeping the family spotless. Daniel Hartman, Emily's older brother, a lawyer whose debts to gambling houses were an open secret. Sarah Hartman, Emily's younger sister, a school teacher admired by her students but rumored to be having an affair with a married politician. When Sullivan delivered the news, Richard erupted in anger, demanding names, suspects, answers. Margaret fainted theatrically, then demanded the media be kept away. Daniel went pale, silent, and Sarah sobbed uncontrollably. Sullivan watched them carefully. In his years on the job, grief always told a story. Sometimes sorrow was genuine. Sometimes sorrow was guilt. Emily's personal life was complicated. She had an ex-boyfriend, Kyle Turner, a mechanic with a history of bar fights and jealousy. Their breakup had been public and violent. Sullivan knew the town would expect Kyle's name to come up quickly. Then there was Tom Bradley, a journalist who had worked closely with Emily on an investigation into corruption in Riverton. They were friends, maybe more. Tom was ambitious, known for publishing damning articles against the mayor and local businesses. If Emily had been helping him, it meant she had been digging into dangerous territory. And finally there was Emily herself. She kept journals, thick leather notebooks she carried everywhere, but not a single one was found in her house the night she was killed. Someone had taken them. Standing under the bridge, rain dripping from his fedora, Sullivan whispered to himself, "This wasn't random. Somebody wanted her silenced." Lena, the rookie, scribbled in her notepad, trying to catch every word. "So you think it's connected to her digging? To her family? Or maybe an ex?" she asked. Sullivan didn't answer right away. He lit a cigarette, even in the pouring rain. In this town, kid, secrets kill. And Riverton has more secrets than anyone dares to count. The forensic team worked through the storm. Dr. Claudia Reynolds, a blood spatter analyst flown in from the State Department, crouched near the mud. Her sharp eyes scanned the patterns left behind. "It doesn't make sense," she muttered. "The angle of the impact doesn't match the trajectory. It looks adjusted, like the evidence was moved." Her mentor, Philip Garner, brushed her off. "Storm washed half of it away. Don't overthink it." But Claudia knew something was off. Later, when the official report came out, the details were neat. Too neat, as if rewritten to fit a narrative. And that narrative pointed to Kyle Turner, the angry ex-boyfriend. News spread fast. Local headlines screamed, "Young woman brutally murdered in Riverton. Is there a killer among us?" People whispered in diners and grocery store lines outside churches. Everyone had an opinion. Emily was too nosy. Emily was blackmailing someone. Emily had crossed the wrong man. The mayor, James Whitmore, held a press conference. Flanked by his wife, Evelyn, he promised justice. Promised Riverton was safe. Promised the police would catch the killer. But his eyes betrayed unease. Sullivan had seen that look before. The look of a man hiding something. In what no one in Riverton knew, not Sullivan, not Claudia, not the Hartmans, was that Emily had been conducting her own investigation. In the weeks before her death, she had uncovered shocking secrets, taken meticulous notes, and hidden them where no one had thought to look. Her story was not just about being a victim. It was about being the first thread in a web so tangled, so dangerous, that it would pull Riverton apart, one murder at a time. Emily Hartman's funeral was held 3 days after her body was found. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, as if Riverton itself mourned. The town turned out in full force, not just to grieve, but to watch. In small towns, funerals weren't just farewells, they were theater where every glance and every tear was measured. Detective Sullivan stood at the back, hat in hand, scanning the crowd. He wasn't watching the casket, he was watching the faces. Richard Hartman shook hands with politicians and businessmen, his grief masked by polished charm. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though her gaze kept drifting toward the cameras. Daniel stood stiffly, avoiding eye contact, while Sarah leaned against her fiancé, trembling as though the world had collapsed. But Sullivan's eyes narrowed when he spotted Kyle Turner. The mechanic hovered near the trees, unshaven, eyes red from drinking or crying. Or both. When the service ended, Kyle vanished before anyone could speak to him. Lena whispered, "Why would he show up if he did it?" Sullivan muttered, "Sometimes guilt brings them back, sometimes innocence does too. That's what makes it tricky." To that evening, Sullivan and Lena searched Emily's apartment. It was neat, almost too neat. Books stacked alphabetically, kitchen spotless, bed made tight. But something was missing. On her desk, there were impressions left behind, faint marks on the wood as if heavy journals had once sat there. The same journals everyone in town remembered seeing her carry. Gone. They searched her laptop, It had been wiped clean. No notes, no drafts, no files. For a woman known for obsessive record-keeping, the emptiness screamed louder than words. Lena frowned. It looks like someone didn't just want her dead. They wanted her erased. Sullivan nodded grimly, which means whatever she knew scared them more than the murder itself. The next day, Dr. Claudia Reynolds returned to the bridge site with her team. She ran fresh simulations of the blood patterns, comparing them with Emily's autopsy. Her conclusion shocked her. Emily had been struck on the head after she was strangled. The sequence of wounds didn't add up to the official report. Claudia took her concerns to Philip Garner. He dismissed her. "We don't need speculation, Claudia. The department wants a clean case. Turner is our man." But Claudia couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. And when she tried to pull the original autopsy photos, she discovered some had been replaced. The night after the funeral, Sullivan received an unexpected visitor. Tom Bradley, the journalist. Tom was wiry, nervous, always looking over his shoulder. He carried a folder of articles and clippings. "Detective Emily was helping me," Tom whispered. "She had information about the Hartmans, financial fraud, money laundering, connections to city contracts. She was going to go public." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "And now she's dead. You think the family silenced her?" Tom shook his head. "Not just them, bigger than them. She mentioned the mayor, she mentioned people outside Riverton, she was close to something." Before Sullivan could press further, Tom snapped the folder shut. "I shouldn't even be here. If they know I'm talking to you, I'll be next." He left as suddenly as he came, leaving Sullivan with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, the town buzzed with rumors. At the diner, waitresses whispered that Emily had been seen arguing with her sister Sarah days before she died. At the grocery store, people swore she had a secret lover. At the church, whispers claimed she had dirt on the mayor himself. Riverton was feeding on Emily's death, and with each story, the list of suspects grew longer. Lena, young and idealistic, was overwhelmed. Everyone in this town had a reason to hate her. How do we narrow it down? Sullivan exhaled smoke, staring at the rain. "You don't narrow it down. You follow the lies until one of them breaks." Kyle Turner was finally brought in for questioning. He looked rough, hollow eyes, trembling hands. He admitted he'd argued with Emily a week before her death, accused her of betraying him, of using him for information. But he swore he hadn't killed her. "She was all I had," he said, voice cracking. "I was angry, yeah, but I couldn't." Sullivan leaned in. "Where were you that night?" Kyle hesitated. "Drunk, at Benny's bar. Nobody saw me leave." A weak alibi. Easy to poke holes in, but Sullivan's gut said something different. Kyle was broken, yes. Dangerous, maybe. But there was a grief in his eyes that couldn't be faked. At City Hall, Mayor James Whitmore held another press conference. His words were polished, but Sullivan watched the body language. Evelyn Whitmore, the mayor's wife, stood close, too close, as though shielding him. Afterward, Lena whispered, "You think the mayor's involved?" Sullivan replied, "In a town like this, power is never clean. If Emily had something on him, he'd have motive. But people like Whitmore don't get their hands dirty, they have others do it for them." Late one night, Sullivan sat at his desk, staring at Emily's case file. He flipped through the bland official reports, but his mind kept circling back to Claudia's words. It doesn't add up. He lit another cigarette, rubbed his tired eyes. Lena, still at her desk, looked up. "You think Turner's innocent, don't you?" "I think," Sullivan muttered, "that this whole town's guilty of something. The question is, Who killed her first, and who's trying to make us believe a story that isn't true? As Riverton slept uneasily, a shadow moved silently through the streets. A figure slipped into the darkened library carrying a bundle wrapped in plastic. Inside the bundle were notebooks, Emily's missing journals. The shadow tucked them into a vent behind the stacks, hidden from sight. Then they walked away, unnoticed. For now, Emily's voice was silent, but her secrets had not disappeared. They were waiting, buried, ready to explode at the worst possible time. The storm returned the following evening, thunder rolling across Riverton as though the sky itself wanted to erase the sins beneath it. Detective Sullivan sat in his car outside the Hartman estate, engine idling, cigarette burning between his fingers. He was waiting, watching the house, knowing that sometimes answers came not from interrogation but from silence and observation. Through the rain-slick windows he saw movement. Richard Hartman arguing with someone on the phone, pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. Margaret sat stiffly on the couch, eyes glued to the news, playing the grieving mother for the cameras. Upstairs, Sarah's light flickered on and off. Sullivan's partner, Lena, tapped her notepad nervously. "We're wasting time. We should be following up on Tom Bradley. He said Emily was helping him. Why haven't we brought him in again?" Sullivan exhaled smoke. "Because if he's telling the truth, the more he talks, the sooner he'll wind up like Emily." And as though the night was listening, a call came across the police radio. Another body. Sullivan's tires hissed against the wet pavement as he sped across town. When they arrived at a cramped apartment building near the river, officers were already swarming. Tom Bradley lay sprawled on his living room floor, a bullet hole in his chest. His desk had been overturned, papers scattered, his laptop missing. Lena froze in the doorway. "It's him," just like he said. Sullivan bent over the body. No forced entry. Whoever did this, Tom let them in. The storm outside rattled the windows as Claudia Reynolds arrived, gloves on, expression grim. She examined the blood pattern on the carpet, the angle of the wound. "Close range," she murmured. "Executed, not murdered in panic. And the evidence? It's been cleaned." Sullivan met her eyes. "Like Emily's scene." Claudia nodded. "Someone is controlling this story." The weight of it pressed on all of them. 2 murders now, both silencing voices digging into corruption. And yet, as Sullivan left the scene, his gut twisted. He couldn't shake the thought that Emily's case had threads pulling in a different direction. The next morning, the town was electric with fear. Newspapers screamed headlines about a killer stalking Riverton. At the diner, patrons huddled close, speaking in low voices. Everyone had theories, and everyone wanted someone to blame. Kyle Turner's name was on every tongue. Drunk, violent, jealous. He was easy to frame, easy to hate. But Sullivan wasn't convinced. He had seen killers before. Their eyes, their movements, the way they spoke without words. Kyle carried the weight of heartbreak, not calculation. At the station, Sullivan questioned him again. Kyle swore he had been at Benny's bar all night, drunk enough to barely stand. A bartender confirmed seeing him, but not the whole evening. An alibi with cracks big enough to drive through. "You loved her, didn't you?" Sullivan asked. Kyle's voice broke. "She was the only person who believed I could be better than I was." Sullivan believed the grief. He also knew grief could coexist with guilt. That evening, Lena went back through Emily's phone records. One number appeared again and again in the final days before her death. A burner phone, untraceable. The last call came just hours before she was killed. She brought it to Sullivan. What if she was being blackmailed? Or what if she was trying to meet someone she trusted, Sullivan said. Someone who betrayed her. The shadows around Riverton seemed to grow with each discovery. Days passed, and whispers turned into paranoia. Rachel Carter, wife of Detective Roy Carter, called the station insisting she had information about Emily. Sullivan arranged to meet her, but she never arrived. Hours later, her body was found in her car, strangled, her face pale against the steering wheel. The department erupted in chaos. Roy Carter was arrested immediately, accused of killing his own wife. Officers whispered that he had been covering his tracks, silencing Rachel before she could expose him. But when Sullivan questioned him, Roy's voice cracked with rage and grief. She was scared. She found something. She wouldn't tell me what, but she said Emily was involved. Why would I kill her? Why would I? His words broke into sobs. Lena watched through the glass. He's lying, she whispered. Sullivan shook his head. No, he's telling the truth, or he believes it. 3 murders. Emily Hartman, Tom Bradley, Rachel Carter, each connected by whispers of secrets, yet none fitting neatly together. The press called it a serial killer. The mayor demanded answers. The people of Riverton locked their doors at night, glancing over their shoulders when they walked alone. Sullivan couldn't sleep. In the quiet hours, he drove to the bridge where Emily had been found. He stood in the rain, staring at the river, trying to hear her voice in the silence. You were digging, he murmured to the night. What did you find? And who killed you first? Behind him, unseen, a figure watched from the trees, silent as the storm. The storm gave way to a heavy fog that clung to Riverton like a shroud. It was the kind of mist that muffled sound, swallowed shapes, and made the familiar look like something lurking in a nightmare. Detective Sullivan hated nights like this. They made killers bold and victims easier to find. Inside the station, the investigation board was filling fast. Emily Hartman's photo at the center, strings of connection to Tom Bradley, to Rachel Carter, to the Hartman family, to the mayor. But the lines led nowhere. Every theory collapsed under its own weight. Lena paced in front of the board. 3 murders in less than 2 weeks. The town thinks we're chasing a serial killer. The mayor's office is calling every hour. And we still don't have a suspect that fits. Sullivan rubbed his temples. Because it's not one suspect, it never is. In Riverton, everyone's guilty of something. The question is, whose sins are worth killing for? Late that night, Sullivan returned to Emily's apartment alone. He searched again, this time slower, methodical. He checked the kitchen, the bookshelves, even the floorboards. In the back of her closet, he found a shoebox taped shut. Inside were scraps of paper, torn receipts, names scribbled in haste, fragments of notes. One stood out. R meeting, don't trust anyone. Sullivan frowned. Who was R? Roy Carter, Richard Hartman, Rachel herself? The note opened a door, but it didn't lead anywhere clear. The next morning, Claudia Reynolds arrived with fresh results. She defied her mentor Philip and rerun the analysis of Emily's wounds. Her conclusion was shocking. Emily's case doesn't fit the others, she told Sullivan and Lena. Her injuries were personal, strangled first, then struck on the head to stage it. Tom Bradley, executed clean. Rachel Carter, strangled but staged to implicate her husband. The killer wants us to believe these are all the same, but they're not. Sullivan stared at her. You're saying Emily's murder is separate? Claudia nodded. Yes. Whoever killed her, their motive was different. The revelation should have been a breakthrough, but it made the case more dangerous. Because if Claudia was right, Riverton didn't have one killer. It had 2. That evening, Sullivan drove past the Hartman estate again. In the glow of the driveway lights, he saw Sarah Hartman slip out of the house, clutching a bag close to her chest. She hurried to her car and drove off. Curious, Sullivan followed at a distance. Sarah drove across town to the school where she worked. She unlocked the door and disappeared inside. Through the dark windows, Sullivan saw her moving through the classroom, rearranging books, pulling something from the bag and hiding it behind a locked cabinet. By the time he confronted her the next morning, whatever she'd hidden was gone. Sarah denied everything, tears streaming down her face. "Emily was my sister. I loved her. Don't you dare accuse me of—" But Sullivan had seen the fear in her eyes. Fear not of loss, but of exposure. Days later, the fourth body surfaced. Professor Helen Myers, Emily's former mentor, was found drowned in her pool. The death looked like an accident until Claudia confirmed bruises around her wrists. Another murder, another voice silenced. The town unraveled. Parents kept children home from school. Shops closed early. Churches filled with frightened prayers. The press swarmed Riverton, calling it cursed, calling it the home of the shadow killer. Sullivan stood in his office, staring at the board. 4 victims now, each tangled in the same messy web, and yet Claudia's words echoed. Emily was different. Her murder didn't belong to the others. That night, Lena brought him coffee, her hands shaking. "What if we've been wrong from the start?" Sullivan looked at her, weary. "We have been. But what if the killer wanted us to think this was one story? What if Emily's death was used as cover? Someone kills her for personal reasons, then another killer uses it to mask their own crimes. We're chasing shadows inside shadows." Sullivan's silence was answer enough. The fog outside thickened as if Riverton itself wanted to hide the truth. In the distance, church bells tolled midnight, and somewhere in town someone whispered to themselves in the dark, crossing another name off a hidden list. Emily Hartman's voice had been silenced. Tom Bradley's pen had been stopped. Rachel Carter's warnings had been erased. Professor Helen Myers' knowledge had been drowned. But the story was far from over, because the secrets Emily had been chasing still waited to be uncovered. And her missing journals, hidden away where no one yet thought to look, held answers that would turn every suspicion upside down. Detective Sullivan stubbed out his cigarette, staring at the board one last time. 4 murders, and not a single truth among them. Riverton's rotten to the core. The question is, how many more will die before the shadows are done walking? And with that, Section 1 closed. Riverton trapped in fear. The investigation tangled in lies, and Emily's murder still whispering from the grave. Dark secrets behind a perfect crime. Rain polished the courthouse steps the morning Tom Bradley's autopsy landed on Detective Mark Sullivan's desk. The report was crisp, clinical, and somehow dishonest, like a smiling photograph with the eyes cut out. Single shot to the chest, close range, little sign of struggle. Clean, efficient. Professional. Not the chaos of rage, but the logic of fear. Sullivan slid the folder across to Lena Morales, who balanced a foam cup of coffee like it might confess. "Read it," he said. "Tell me what's missing." "Everything human," Lena murmured after a minute. "This feels curated." Dr. Claudia Reynolds arrived at noon, rain on her hair and tension in her hands. She laid 2 photos on the table, the wound track in Tom's chest, and a close-up of smudged flooring just inside the apartment door. "Close range," she said, tapping the first image. "But look, powder residue should be heavier on the threshold. We found none on the hall footage. That means the shooter wore protection or changed before leaving. It's methodical. It's planned." "So not a crime of passion," Sullivan said. "Not even personal," Claudia replied. "This is a message in the language of control. They walked Tom's apartment again without uniforms crowding the scene. The storm smell had faded to paper dust and old coffee. Sullivan stood where Tom fell, tracing the angle in the air. Lena sifted the desk. Torn receipts, a broken USB cap, a press badge bent like a bitten coin. Under the desk, taped to the underside, she found a post-it wrapped in plastic. On it, thin letters said, "On a gala, Friday, midnight handoff." No name, no initials, just the shape of a promise. At City Hall, Mayor James Whitmore rehearsed calm for television. He wore a blue tie the color of municipal trust and delivered phrases polished by small-town politics. "Riverton is safe. Our police are competent. Rumors will not decide this investigation." Beside him, his wife Evelyn kept a hand on his sleeve, the gesture of a partner or a keeper. When the cameras flipped off, her smile vanished first. Back at the station, Lena pulled Tom's drafts. The archive showed a series on zoning exemptions, campaign donations, and city contracts feeding the same few firms. One of them, Hartman Construction. In an unpublished draft, initials repeated in the margins, PG. Lena looked up. "Philip Garner?" Claudia's face closed like a door. "My mentor. Head of the state unit. He wouldn't..." She stopped, then corrected herself. "He shouldn't." Philip met them in a lab that smelled of ethanol and apology. He was careful with words, generous with time, and stainless with paperwork. "Evidence tampering is a serious allegation," he said. "Thunderstorms degrade patterns. Memory does the rest. Don't let anxiety become narrative." "Is that a yes or a no to the question we didn't ask?" Sullivan said. Philip smiled. "That's a reminder to be precise." On the drive back, Claudia stared at her hands. Tom's entry angle indicates a right-handed shooter half a step inside. The security cam shows a left-handed silhouette leaving. Someone edited the truth. That night, Sullivan and Lena took the back booth at the diner where Tom met sources. They ordered coffee and watched the door. People recognized the detectives and looked away. Fear travels faster than gossip when it thinks it's next. An hour in, a bartender from Benny's slid into the booth. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "Bradley told me if anything happened, I should say one thing. Follow the gala money. There's a midnight auction behind the speeches, not art, not antiques, favors." "Who pays?" Lena asked. "Who wants to be untouchable?" the bartender said, leaving a napkin with a number scribbled on it. The number wasn't a phone. It was a transfer code. Sullivan drove to the river after midnight, turned off the engine, and listened to Riverton breathe. He thought of Emily's missing journals, Tom's erased laptop, and Rachel Carter's silenced voice. Every piece of this murder investigation leaned toward one conclusion. The facts were being managed by hands that understood procedure. Lena dug through Tom's email backups. She found a thread with a pseudonymous sender, Deep Archivist. The messages referenced public records requests blocked without explanation, a whistleblower at City Hall, and 3 names that reappeared: Whitmore, Hartman, Garner. "Could be framing," Lena said. "Could be truth-wearing melodrama." "Could be both," Sullivan replied. "Real power hides inside exaggeration." They met the Whitmores the next morning in an office lined with ribbon cuttings and harvest festivals. The mayor's voice was warm. Evelyn offered coffee with a sweetness that felt rehearsed. "Tom Bradley was an adversary," the mayor admitted. "But journalism keeps us honest, doesn't it?" His gaze didn't meet theirs. Evelyn's did. "Detective," she said, "if your department needs resources, security for the gala, overtime, anything, our office will help." Helpful to whom? Sullivan wondered. He saw steel beneath her courtesy. On the sidewalk, Lena exhaled. "I don't like her." "You're not supposed to," Sullivan said. You're supposed to admire her. That afternoon, Claudia called with a whisper that shook. Tom's ballistic profile and Emily's cranial trauma were filed under the same meta tag. That never happens unless someone copies templates. Whoever is doing this isn't just tampering scenes, they're tampering the narrative scaffolding, the thing the system believes before it looks. Sullivan stared at the board. Serial killer, political hit list, family vendetta. Each theory explained everything until it touched the details. Then it explained nothing. The mystery felt like a maze built from mirrors. Move toward one truth and your reflection blocks the exit. At dusk, a voicemail with no caller ID arrived. The voice calm. "Detective, you're tugging the wrong thread. The gala will give you a suspect, but not the one you need. If you want Emily's killer, stop treating her as Chapter 1. The line clicked dead. Lena appeared at his door. "You heard it too?" He nodded. "Somebody wants us to chase the spectacular and miss the simple." "What's simple?" He looked toward the Hartman estate. Sullivan drove out to the Hartman estate that night, the kind of silence around the mansion that made even the trees feel like they were listening. Lights glowed in 3 windows. Richard in his office, pacing with a glass of bourbon. Margaret in the parlor, curtains half drawn as though grief should be staged for an audience. Sarah's room dark except for the flicker of a laptop screen. He parked across the street and watched. Sometimes patience revealed more than pressure. After midnight, Sarah slipped out the side door carrying another bag. This time she didn't head for the school. She drove across town to a motel by the interstate, checked into room 12 and left the blinds cracked. Sullivan waited until she disappeared inside before he approached. The room smelled of mildew and cigarette ash. On the nightstand lay a second phone, prepaid and unregistered. Beside it, a manila folder stuffed with bank statements. The name at the top, Hartman Construction. The payments looped through shell companies and landed in accounts tied to offshore numbers. Sarah caught him in the act, standing in the doorway, face pale. "You can't be here," she said, trembling. "Neither can you," Sullivan replied. "Unless you want to tell me why your sister's company looks like a laundromat." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't kill Emily. I swear I didn't. She was trying to protect me. She knew Dad's company was dirty. She knew Daniel's debts were tied to it. She said she could fix it. But," Sarah broke off, shaking her head, "I never saw her journals. I don't know what she found. But if you think this is about one killer, you're wrong. Something bigger is swallowing all of us." Sullivan didn't arrest her. He simply said, "Don't leave town," though both knew she already had plans to. The next morning, Claudia Reynolds arrived with fresh findings. She placed side-by-side photographs on Sullivan's desk. Blood spatter from Emily's scene, residue from Tom's, and strangulation bruises from Rachel Carter. 3 murders, Claudia said, 3 different methods, yet the reports grouped them as one pattern. "I know Garner is editing them. He insists consistency means efficiency, but consistency doesn't exist in reality. Every scene tells its own story. If someone's forcing them to match, it means we're chasing a fiction." "Why?" Lena asked. "Because fiction is easier to solve," Claudia replied, "and easier to blame on the wrong man." By noon, the press had learned of Sarah Hartman's motel visit. Rumors exploded. Was she Emily's killer? Was she blackmailing her own family? Margaret Hartman appeared on television, pearl necklace gleaming, dismissing the story as slander. Richard stood behind her, face thunderous, as though reputation hurt more than loss. At the station, Sullivan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Rachel Carter meeting Emily at the coffee shop 2 days before Emily's death. On the back, scrawled in hurried ink, she was going to talk. Roy Carter's protests from his cell echoed through Sullivan's memory. She found something. The net tightened, but in the wrong direction. Every discovery created new suspects rather than clearing old ones. That evening, Sullivan attended a closed-door council meeting. The mayor sat at the head, voice commanding but brittle. Evelyn Whitmore's presence dominated the room even more. Her gaze swept like a searchlight, sharp and unwavering. "The people want assurance," the mayor said. "They want safety. Detective, tell them we are closing in." Sullivan shook his head. "We're not. The evidence has been staged. At least one of your so-called connections doesn't belong." Murmurs filled the chamber. Evelyn leaned forward, smile thin. "Detective, your candor is refreshing, but be careful. In Riverton, candor is often mistaken for disloyalty." Her words landed like a threat wrapped in silk. Later that night, Sullivan sat with Lena in the diner again, the board of suspects growing heavier in his mind. "You see it too, don't you?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Emily's murder isn't the first step of this chain. It's a separate story being camouflaged by the others." "Exactly," Sullivan said. "Which means somewhere in these shadows there are at least two killers. One personal, one political. And both of them are using Riverton's fear as cover." They sat in silence, the neon lights buzzing above them, the town outside curling tighter into itself. Then Lena asked the question Sullivan had been avoiding. "So which killer do we chase first?" Sullivan lit another cigarette, exhaled smoke into the stale air. "The one who makes a mistake, because sooner or later even a perfect crime leaves a crack." And somewhere across town another shadow moved, preparing to make sure the next murder looked like part of the same story. The next morning, Riverton woke to more bad news. Professor Helen Myers, Emily's old mentor and one of the few people known for defending her curiosity, was found dead in her backyard pool. Neighbors said she often swam before dawn, but this time she didn't surface. Paramedics pulled her out before sunrise. Bruises around her wrists told the truth long before the autopsy confirmed it. The story broke across local news stations by noon. Another respected figure gone, another life claimed by the so-called shadow killer. Riverton's fear metastasized. Schools closed early. Parents refused to let children walk home. Shops turned their signs to closed before dusk. Detective Sullivan stared at the body from the edge of the pool. Helen Myers had been connected to Emily not just through the college but through community projects, mentorships, charity work, whispers of helping Emily connect dots in her investigation. Now she was gone. Drowned but not drowned by accident. Lena stood beside him, fists clenched. "That's 4 murders in less than 2 weeks. Emily, Tom, Rachel, now Helen. And each one is tied to the Hartmans or the Whitmores. Sir, this isn't coincidence, it's deliberate." Sullivan didn't answer right away. He was watching the water ripple. "Deliberate, yes, but not the same hands. Look at the details. Tom was shot. Rachel was strangled. Helen drowned. Emily—" His voice caught for a moment. "Emily was both strangled and struck. These are different signatures." Claudia arrived in her lab coat, exhausted eyes framed by sleepless nights. "I've run the preliminary data. The pool had no signs of forced struggle outside of the bruises. She trusted whoever came close. That's why she didn't fight. It was someone she knew." Sullivan exhaled smoke into the damp morning. Riverton's a small town. Everyone knows everyone. That makes it easier for killers to walk through front doors. By afternoon, the mayor's office announced a special task force to calm the panic. Cameras filmed James Whitmore standing at a podium, his voice grave. But the crowd's attention wasn't on him. It was on Evelyn Whitmore, who stood in flawless poise beside him, speaking with a confidence that felt like command. "Riverton must stay strong," she told reporters. "Our trust in the system cannot falter. Justice will be served." Sullivan leaned against the back wall of the press room, watching her. The crowd saw reassurance. He saw performance. Later that night, Sullivan found a letter slipped under his office door. No envelope, no signature, just 2 sentences scrawled in a rush. "Stop chasing the serial killer. Start chasing the forger of truth." He turned the note over, checked for fingerprints. Nothing. Claudia arrived moments later, clutching her own discovery. She had compared the autopsy photos from Emily and Helen's deaths. "Look at this," she whispered, laying them side by side. "The angles are staged. In both cases, the photo framing hides details that would disprove the official timeline. Philip Garner is sanitizing the files. He isn't just cleaning evidence, he's controlling the story." Lena shook her head. "But why? What does he gain?" Claudia's voice was heavy. "Prestige, control, or maybe protection for the people who pull the strings. He taught me that in forensic science, truth is only as strong as the chain of custody. Break the chain, you break the truth. And someone's breaking it on purpose." Sullivan tapped the mysterious letter against the table. "Then we follow the liar who writes history, and sooner or later we'll find out whose script he's protecting." 2 days later, Sarah Hartman vanished. Her car was found abandoned near the edge of town, purse still inside, phone crushed beneath the passenger seat. Margaret Hartman stood before cameras again, this time crying in a way that didn't look rehearsed. "First Emily, now Sarah," she sobbed. "My family is being hunted." Richard Hartman clenched his jaw beside her, radiating fury. "If the police can't stop this, I will." The cameras caught every word. The headlines wrote themselves. "Wealthy Riverton family targeted by killer." But Sullivan wasn't convinced Sarah was dead. She had been hiding documents, carrying burner phones, meeting in motels. Disappearance could mean murder. It could also mean cover. That evening, he drove past the motel where he had once confronted her. Room 12 was empty now, stripped bare, but the manager admitted a woman matching Sarah's description had checked out hurriedly at dawn. She left no forwarding address. Sullivan sat in the dark parking lot, cigarette ember glowing. Either Sarah was hiding from the killer or hiding from the truth. Back at the station, Lena pieced together the timeline on the board. Emily was killed first, strangled and struck. Then Tom, executed. Then Rachel, strangled. Helen drowned. 4 different styles. 4 different methods. "Sir, this can't be one person." Sullivan nodded slowly. "Which means Riverton has more than one shadow walking its streets. And if that's true, we're not chasing a killer. We're chasing a conspiracy." The fluorescent light above them flickered as if to agree, and somewhere outside, under the fog-thickened night, another life was already being marked for silence. Riverton had grown quieter with each killing, as if fear itself had swallowed the sound of the town. Streets emptied by nightfall. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Even the church bells rang softer, as though the steeple feared attention. Sullivan drove those empty streets with the radio low, his thoughts louder than the static. 4 victims, 1 missing woman, a story that refused to stay straight. At the station, Claudia Reynolds locked herself in the lab. She laid out print after print, photograph after photograph, connecting the cases like a scientist chasing ghosts. When Sullivan joined her, she barely looked up. "It's all wrong," she muttered. "Every report has been shaped like clay molded into a sculpture someone wanted us to admire." She pointed to the contrast between Emily's bruises and Rachel's. Different hands, different killers, but Philip signed off on them as if they matched. He's the puppeteer detective, and I'm starting to wonder if he's the only one. Sullivan studied her carefully. Claudia's voice was raw with anger, but beneath it was fear. A mentor willing to compromise the truth was dangerous enough. A mentor working for someone else was lethal. That night, Lena Morales was combing through Emily's bank records when she found a small recurring transfer. $50 every week, always withdrawn in cash. No pattern, no explanation. But the timing mattered. The last transfer was made the day before Emily's death. The withdrawal came from an ATM near the school where Sarah taught. She wasn't paying bills, Lena whispered. She was paying someone off. Sullivan frowned, or buying silence. 2 hours later, a tip arrived from an anonymous call routed through 3 payphones. The voice was male, calm, deliberate. If you want to know why Bradley died, check the gala guest list. Everyone he threatened is hiding there, but don't forget, Emily's death doesn't belong to them. The call ended before a trace could be pulled. The gala. The very word hung like smoke in Riverton's air, an annual event where politicians, businessmen, and the wealthy elite gathered under chandeliers to drink champagne and trade influence. If the rumors were true, the gala wasn't just a fundraiser, it was a marketplace of secrets. Sullivan and Lena secured an invitation through the mayor's office, though neither believed it was offered in goodwill. Evelyn Whitmore herself handed them the envelope, smile carved like glass. "We want you to feel welcome," she said softly, her eyes daring him to argue. After all, transparency is essential in times of crisis. The night of the gala, the Hartman family arrived in black suits and muted grief. Richard shook hands as though nothing could stain his legacy. Margaret clung to his arm, eyes darting to every camera. Daniel followed, face pale, lips pressed tight, as though the gambling debts pressing on him were heavier than Emily's coffin. The mayor made his speech, words polished with civic pride, but Evelyn commanded the room without speaking, her gaze sweeping across the crowd like a ruler inspecting subjects. Sullivan felt her eyes land on him and stay there too long. Lena drifted through the guests, pretending to mingle. She overheard businessmen whispering about contracts, lawyers trading names, and one chilling phrase repeated in hushed tones: "The package is safe. Friday at midnight." When midnight came, the music softened, the chandeliers dimmed, and half the guests slipped into a side hall. Sullivan followed, watching from the doorway. Behind closed doors, envelopes were exchanged, promises made, the shadow economy of Riverton displayed in plain sight. Suddenly, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the hall. Shouts echoed, glasses shattered, and someone screamed. By the time power returned, chaos had torn through the ballroom. The mayor was on the floor, bleeding from a gash across his head. Not dead, but close. Evelyn stood over him, face calm, voice sharp as she demanded order. "It was an attempt," she told the crowd, eyes scanning like a predator. "Someone here wanted him gone, but I will not let Riverton fall." The guests nodded, cowed by her certainty, but Sullivan saw something else in her composure. Not shock, not fear, strategy. Back at the station, reports flooded in. Witnesses swore they saw a masked intruder. Others swore the mayor slipped and fell. The contradictions were endless. Claudia studied the wound and shook her head. This wasn't random. Someone used the blackout as cover, but the cut was shallow. If they wanted him dead, he'd be dead. This was theater, Sullivan muttered. Or misdirection. He stepped out for air, cigarette between his fingers. Lena joined him, her voice low. "We've been so focused on patterns we forgot the simplest question. Who benefits? Not just from one death, but from all of them." Sullivan blew smoke into the night. "Follow that question, and maybe we'll finally separate Emily from the rest." Maybe then we'll find the hand that started this chain, and the hand that's using it. Across town, in a dark classroom at the school, a cabinet door clicked shut. Inside, behind dusty textbooks, lay Emily Hartman's missing journals, sealed in plastic, waiting for someone brave enough, or doomed enough, to find them. The web of lies and family betrayal. The days after the gala felt like Riverton had swallowed poison. The mayor survived the attack, bandaged and shaken, but the town was buzzing with theories. Who had cut the lights? Who wanted him dead? And why did Evelyn Whitmore, not James, seem to be the one holding Riverton together? Her words filled the evening news, her face on every screen, promising stability while her husband lay in silence. Detective Sullivan watched her interviews with the volume low, cigarette smoke curling into the dim light of his office. Evelyn looked like calm incarnate, her eyes steady, her voice measured. But Sullivan saw what most people missed, the way she leaned into control like it was oxygen. The mayor might wear the title, but Evelyn wore the power. Meanwhile, the Hartmans fractured under the weight of suspicion. Sarah remained missing. Her car abandoned, her absence unexplainable. Daniel stumbled through interviews with the press, denying debts he couldn't hide. Richard barked at reporters, threatening lawsuits, while Margaret wept into cameras, her grief suspiciously rehearsed. Lena pinned fresh photographs to the investigation board. 4 murders, 1 attempted assassination, a missing sister. Sir, it's not just crime anymore, it's war inside this town. Sullivan didn't disagree. And war always begins at home. He called Daniel Hartman in for questioning. The young lawyer sat in the interrogation room, sweat already dampening his collar. "I didn't kill my sister," he insisted, his voice cracking. "Emily wanted to help me. She said she had evidence that could clear my debts, maybe even take down the people who owned me, but I never saw it. After she died, the calls kept coming." "Who was calling?" Sullivan pressed. Daniel shook his head. "Blocked numbers, demands for money. They said if I didn't pay, my family would suffer." "Your family already is," Sullivan said coldly. "Emily's dead. Sarah's missing. That's suffering enough." Daniel buried his face in his hands. "You don't understand. The people I owe, they don't stop at money. They own half the town. They own politicians, they own the police. If I talk, I die. If I stay silent, my family dies." The confession was half a truth, Sullivan could tell. Daniel was guilty of something, but not necessarily murder. Outside, Lena whispered, "What if Emily's journals were about Daniel's debts? What if she threatened to expose the people who controlled him?" Sullivan didn't answer. He was already thinking about the Whitmores. That night, Evelyn paid an unannounced visit to the Hartman estate. Margaret welcomed her with teary eyes while Richard stiffened in the doorway. Evelyn entered anyway, her presence filling the room like cold air. "I came to offer condolences," she said smoothly, "and to remind you that appearances matter now more than ever." Richard's jaw tightened. "My daughter's dead. Another is missing. Appearances mean nothing." Evelyn's smile didn't falter. "Appearances mean everything. Riverton needs to see a united front, not cracks, not scandals. Keep your house in order, Mr. Hartman, or the town will burn you alive before a killer ever gets the chance." Sullivan watched from his car across the street, noting every movement. The Hartmans were pawns, Evelyn the player. But pawns had motives too. The next morning, Claudia brought him another discovery. Rachel Carter's phone records showed multiple calls to Emily before her death. One voicemail survived. Rachel's panicked voice whispering, "Emily, I found it. Meet me tomorrow. Don't tell anyone, especially not Roy." It explained why Rachel had been silenced, but it didn't explain why Emily had trusted her. Lena replayed the voicemail again and again. She found something, but what? And why did she warn Emily not to trust her own husband? The case felt like a spider's web. Every strand connected, every tug shaking the whole structure. Sullivan knew they were caught in it as much as the victims had been. By the week's end, the council chamber filled again. This time the crowd wasn't patient. Angry voices rose against the mayor, demanding resignations, demanding justice. Evelyn stood at the podium instead of James, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Riverton is not broken," she declared. "Riverton is strong, and those who would tear it apart will answer for their crimes. We will not allow corruption to define us." The applause that followed was uneasy, reluctant. Sullivan saw fear in the audience, not hope. Fear of Evelyn. After the meeting, Sullivan intercepted her outside. "Strong words," he said. She gave him that cold smile again. "Strong times call for strong voices." "You're enjoying this," he muttered. Her eyes flashed. "Detective, I don't enjoy murder. I enjoy order. And if you're wise, you'll stop looking at me and start looking at the men who think chaos is profitable." It wasn't denial. It was redirection. And it made Sullivan's skin crawl. Back at the station, Lena studied the board again. Exhaustion etched into her young face. What if she's right? What if the killers aren't one of them, but all of them? Different people cleaning up their own messes one after another, and the evidence is just tangled together. Sullivan stared at Emily's photo in the center. Then the only way to untangle it is to find her voice again. Find the journals. They'll tell us which part of this web belongs to Emily's killer and which belongs to everyone else. But until then, Riverton would remain caught, every family betraying itself, every shadow hiding a knife. Sullivan didn't sleep the night after the council erupted. He drove aimlessly, then parked near the Riverwalk where Riverton kept its polite smile. Fog hung low over the water and the street lamps carved cones of yellow into the dark. He called Chief Hal Peterson and asked for an off-record meet. Hal arrived in a battered parka. They stood without shaking hands. "Your board looks like a conspiracy wall," Hal said. "You planning to brief me or bury me?" "I'm planning to keep people alive," Sullivan replied. "That means you stop letting Philip Garner touch our evidence. And it means I get quiet access to the gala guest list and the emergency generator logs." Hal held his stare. "You think the blackout was inside help?" "I think the blackout was choreography," Sullivan said. "And I think the person leading the dance isn't the one with a bandage on his head." Hal exhaled steam. "Fine. But if you're wrong, you own the fallout." By dawn, Sullivan and Lena were at St. Jude's, where Pastor Cole knew every grief by name. He handed over the sign-in book from Emily's memorial vigil. 2 new names caught Lena's eye, Eric Bennett and Anya Novak. Eric was Sarah Hartman's fiancé, a legislative aide whose smile never reached his eyes. Anya was an accountant from out of town, a stranger who had no business at a small-town vigil, unless she did. They found Eric at his apartment with boxes half-packed. He said he was moving closer to the capital for work. His answers broke into polite shards when Sullivan asked about Sarah. "She's traumatized," Eric insisted. "She needs space. Or she needs to run," Lena said. Eric's jaw ticked. "If you're accusing her of something, charge her or leave her alone." Sullivan scanned the boxes. Inside one, tucked under sweaters, was a burner phone. Locked. Eric snatched the lid closed. "That's private." "Not if it ties into a murder investigation," Sullivan said. He left without seizing it. Sometimes fear spoke louder when you let it keep its toys. They found Anya Novak at a co-working office above the bakery. She kept double ledgers open on 2 laptops and a travel bag by her feet. When Lena said Hartman Construction, Anya didn't blink. I reconcile numbers. Dirty numbers are still numbers. If you want sermons, talk to your pastor. Who hired you? Sullivan asked. An intermediary, she said. Initial R. The letter struck the air like a match. R for Roy, Richard, Rachel. Riverton had more R's than alibis. Anya zipped her bag. My contract ended the day Emily died. That makes me unlucky, not involved. She slid a card across the table. It was blank except for a routing code. Back at the lab, Claudia cued a recording, hands trembling. She had met Philip Garner in the parking structure and keyed her phone before he arrived. His voice filled the room. Coaxing, patient, deadly. You're talented, Claudia. Don't waste your career chasing imperfections. The story is bigger than a few contradictory fibers. We need the town to feel safe. We guide them. Then softer. Think about your funding. Lena's face went cold. That's bribery. It's doctrine, Claudia said, and it's why 4 murders look like one case. Sullivan asked, did he admit who asked for the edits? No, she said, but he used a phrase twice, for the office upstairs. Not the lab, something political. Betrayal spread like mold. Margaret Hartman called the station to announce a scholarship in Emily's name, then demanded the investigation stop, dragging our family through the mud. Richard met quietly with a man at the country club bar, Mason Lee, a former IT contractor for City Hall whose specialty was making digital footprints disappear. When Sullivan approached, both men rose, polite. Just golf talk, Richard said. Mason smiled with the confidence of someone who never signed anything. That evening, Lena traced the $50 withdrawals from Emily's account to a library kiosk and a school vending alcove. 2 hiding places made sense if Emily kept duplicates. The librarian remembered her using the back stacks. The custodian, Mr. Alvarez, remembered hearing the cabinet click after hours. She said she was helping the kids, he told Lena. I believed her. Past midnight, Sullivan knocked on Margaret's door alone. She greeted him in silk and frost. He asked about Eric Bennett. She called him reliable. He asked about Anya Novak. She called her irrelevant. He asked about the initial R. Margaret poured tea with steady hands. Detective, I have buried one daughter and lost another. If you are here to play word games, leave. Emily wrote our meeting, don't trust anyone, Sullivan said. Was R you? Richard? Rachel? Her spoon paused, for a breath. Then it clinked again like nothing had caught. On his way down the steps, Sullivan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, a photo of Sarah in a bus station, hood up, looking at the departures board. The caption read, She's not missing, she's hiding, ask why. Morning brought small answers and larger questions. The generator logs from the gala showed a manual bypass at 11:58 p.m. The access code belonged to a maintenance foreman who had called in sick. His door camera showed a visitor just before noon that day. Evelyn Whitmore delivering Get Well flowers. The bouquet glowed like a flag. Lena whispered, She doesn't hide. She dares us to notice. Because power is a kind of alibi, Sullivan said. It says who would be bold enough. Then it smirks. He turned to the board. Emily's photo anchored the center, ringed by faces linked with string. Rachel, Tom, Helen, Sarah, Daniel, Richard, Margaret, Eric, Anya, Philip, Evelyn, the mayor, Chief Hal, Pastor Cole, Mason Lee, Mr. Alvarez. 20 names and counting, and every one of them connected by money, favors, fear, or love. Family betrayal isn't a subplot, Sullivan said. It's the operating system. And someone's writing the code, Lena replied. Find the programmer, he said. And we found the killer who needed a crowd. Riverton's air grew heavier with every passing day. as if each secret tightened the noose around the town. The newspapers no longer called it a crime spree, they called it an epidemic. 4 murders, 1 attempted assassination, 1 missing woman. A population of 12,000 held its breath. Detective Sullivan stood in front of the board again, the photos of Emily, Tom, Rachel, and Helen staring back at him. He traced the strings with his finger. "One of these doesn't belong," he muttered. Lena joined him, clutching her notepad. "Emily," he nodded. "Her case doesn't fit the others, Claudia's right, but someone wants them to look connected. The question is who benefits from sewing all these threads into one tapestry." That night, Sullivan drove to the country club where Richard Hartman was known to drown his fury in bourbon. Richard sat alone at the bar, tie loosened, anger simmering. Sullivan slid onto the stool beside him. "You've lost 2 daughters," Sullivan said. "Emily's dead. Sarah's missing. You don't look like a man fighting for answers. You look like a man fighting to keep his secrets." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, detective. My family's name built this town." Sullivan leaned closer. "Your family's name is written all over contracts, debts, and lies, and Emily was going to expose it. That's why she's gone." Richard slammed his glass down, the crack echoing through the bar. "If you think I killed my own daughter, you're sicker than the man who did." "Then prove it," Sullivan said calmly. "Where were you the night she died?" Richard's silence was louder than any confession. The next morning, Margaret Hartman appeared on a morning news program. Draped in black, voice trembling, she told the anchor, "The police are chasing ghosts while our family bleeds. My daughter Sarah is gone. My Emily is in the ground. And yet the whispers keep painting us as villains. Enough is enough." The public ate it up. Sympathy surged for the Hartmans. Sullivan knew it was theater. He'd seen Margaret's performance before. But when the anchor asked her directly, "Did Emily ever confide in you about what she was investigating?" Margaret's hands shook just a fraction too long before she said, "No." Later that afternoon, Sullivan received another envelope. Inside was a photo of Margaret at a motel, room 12, the same one Sarah had used. She was meeting a man in a gray suit. His face wasn't clear, but Lena enhanced the image on the computer. It was Mason Lee, the IT fixer who made digital footprints vanish. "Margaret's not just grieving," Lena whispered. "She's covering tracks." Meanwhile, Claudia continued her quiet rebellion against Philip Garner. She cornered Sullivan in the hallway with a folder. "These are the unedited versions of the forensic photos. I pulled them before Philip got his hands on them." Inside were images of Emily's crime scene that contradicted the official file. Angles of bruising, blood patterns that didn't match the report, and in the margins of the original notes, a scrawl in Emily's own handwriting. "Meeting confirmed. R will try to stop me," Lena gasped. "She left her mark in the evidence." "Philip should have reported this," Claudia said. "Instead, he buried it. Ask yourself why." The betrayal deepened. That evening, Sullivan confronted Philip outside the courthouse. "Why hide Emily's notes?" Philip's eyes hardened. "Because the dead can't defend themselves, and because you're asking the wrong questions. These cases are bigger than Riverton, bigger than me. You dig too far, detective, and you'll join your victims." He walked away before Sullivan could press further. The same night, Evelyn Whitmore hosted a private dinner at the mayor's residence. It wasn't public, but word spread fast. Select families, business leaders, and a handful of council members attended. Sullivan watched from across the street as limousines arrived. Evelyn greeted each guest like royalty receiving tribute. Lena sat beside him in the car. "Why throw a party when half the town thinks you're hiding something?" "Because power doesn't apologize," Sullivan said. "It flaunts." Near midnight, a scream echoed from inside the mansion. Sullivan and Lena rushed across the lawn, but by the time they entered, the guests were calm again, sipping wine as though nothing had happened. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, voice sharp but steady. A guest fainted, nothing more. But Sullivan knew the sound of fear. He saw the look on the guests' faces, fear of speaking, fear of crossing her. On their way out, Lena whispered, "She controls them." "She doesn't just control them," Sullivan muttered. "She owns them." The next day, Sullivan received an unexpected visitor at his office. Eric Bennett, Sarah's fiancé, pale and jittery. He placed the burner phone on Sullivan's desk. "She told me to hold it," he said. "Said if anything happened to her, give it to you." Sullivan unlocked it. The phone contained only one thing: audio recordings. Emily's voice captured in hurried whispers. "They'll come after me. If I disappear, it's because of them, my family, the money, the lies, our knows." The file ended abruptly. Lena's eyes widened. "She left us breadcrumbs." Sullivan leaned back, mind racing. Emily's voice had returned, not from the grave, but from the device she trusted with her last fears. And her words pointed in two directions: her family and the mysterious R. He lit a cigarette, staring at the smoke curling upward. Riverton isn't just hiding killers, it's hiding the truth itself. And every betrayal leads back to a family name. The burner phone recordings played again and again in Sullivan's office. Emily's voice, alive yet terrified, whispered warnings in the dark. "R knows." The words clung to the walls like smoke. Lena listened with her arms folded tight, as if bracing against a storm only she could feel. "R could be Roy Carter," Lena said quietly. Rachel told her not to trust him. Maybe she was right. Sullivan shook his head. "Roy's a drunk and a bully, but not this careful. Whoever killed Emily knew how to stage a scene. Roy doesn't have the brain for it." "Then Richard Hartman?" Lena pressed. "Maybe," Sullivan admitted, "but when you've got a family full of liars, you can't pick one R without picking them all." The next morning, Richard Hartman called a press conference of his own. He stood at the podium in front of the construction company headquarters, flanked by workers in orange vests like props in a play. He swore he'd dedicate his fortune to finding Emily's killer, swore he had nothing to hide. Sullivan watched from the edge of the crowd. He recognized the language of desperation. Richard was protecting something bigger than his pride. Later, Claudia arrived at the station with new lab results. "I double-checked Helen Myers's pool water samples," she said. "Chlorine levels don't match her own system. The water was tampered with. Someone added chemicals to disguise bruising. Whoever killed her wanted the autopsy to miss it." "Philip again?" Sullivan asked. Claudia's mouth tightened. "If it is, he's not doing it alone." Betrayal wasn't just in families. It was in the system itself. That night, Sullivan received another envelope. Inside were photographs, blurry surveillance shots of Sarah Hartman alive boarding a bus out of town. The note scrawled beneath read, "She ran for a reason." If Sarah was alive, then the Hartmans knew more than they admitted. Sullivan drove to the estate again, storm clouds brewing overhead. Margaret answered the door, eyes red but dry, voice sharp as glass. "You've harassed my family enough," she hissed. "Your daughter's alive," Sullivan said. "I want to know why she ran." Margaret froze, the first honest crack in her performance. Then she whispered, "Sarah always thought she was the clever one. If she's gone, she chose to leave. Don't drag her back into this." But Sullivan knew better. Sarah hadn't left to escape grief. She'd left to escape guilt. Meanwhile, Evelyn Whitmore tightened her grip on Riverton. She appeared in every newspaper, every interview, promising to protect the town from collapse. Her husband, the mayor, faded into silence, his words fewer, his health recovering. Evelyn was the face of Riverton now, and she wielded that power like a blade. At a council meeting, she looked directly at Sullivan as she spoke. "This town demands loyalty," she said. "Those who betray Riverton betray us all." Her eyes lingered, a challenge wrapped in silk. Back at the station, Lena slammed her notebook shut. "She's not hiding anymore, she's daring us. She wants us to accuse her so she can crush us." "Then we don't accuse," Sullivan said. "We prove." Proof came in fragments. Eric Bennett, Sarah's fiancé, admitted he had listened to one of Emily's recordings before handing the phone over. "She mentioned meeting someone the night she died," he said. "She sounded scared but determined. Said if she didn't show up again, it was because she'd finally found the truth." "Who was she meeting?" Lena asked. Eric hesitated. "She only said one of family." The word hit Sullivan like a hammer. Emily hadn't died chasing politics or journalism. She'd died chasing blood ties. 2 days later, a body turned up at the edge of town. Victor Ramirez, the small-time dealer tied to Daniel's debts, was found shot execution style. In his jacket pocket, police discovered a flash drive. On it were financial ledgers implicating both the Hartmans and the Whitmores in laundering money through shell accounts. Lena stared at the files in shock. "This is it. This proves the families were working together. Evelyn's speeches, Richard's contracts. It's all part of the same network." But Sullivan remained still, staring at Emily's photo on the board. "And yet, Emily's murder doesn't fit. She wasn't silenced for politics or contracts. She was silenced for something closer." "Closer how?" Lena asked. Sullivan lit a cigarette, smoke curling like the questions in his head. "Closer like betrayal that cuts from inside the home. She knew too much about her own blood. That night, Claudia confessed something she had hidden for weeks. She had once confronted Emily shortly before her death, warning her that digging too deep could ruin lives. "She told me," Claudia whispered, tears in her eyes, "if I stop, someone else will die. If I keep going, it might be me. Either way, Riverton bleeds." Emily had known her fate. She had walked into it willingly. As Section 3 drew to a close, Sullivan finally saw the shape of the web. Riverton wasn't suffering from one killer's spree, it was suffocating under multiple betrayals, each family clawing at the other, each murder layered to disguise the truth. And at the center of it all was Emily Hartman, victim, investigator, and betrayer of secrets. The town wasn't being eaten alive by a shadow. The shadow was everyone. Multiple murders in a small American town. By the time Professor Helen Myers was lowered into the ground, Riverton was already unraveling. 4 funerals in less than 3 weeks had stripped the town of its pretense. Curtains stayed drawn, businesses shuttered early, and the police station's phones rang with more rumors than leads. Each death had the same headline: another victim of the Shadow Killer. Detective Sullivan didn't believe in the nickname. Shadows were silent, but these murders were loud. Each one carried a message, each one twisted the town tighter into fear. The morning after Helen's funeral, he and Lena were called to the riverbank. A fisherman had found a body tangled in the reeds. The current had carried it downstream, swollen and pale. When the coroner rolled the body onto the bank, Sullivan recognized him instantly. Victor Ramirez, the low-level dealer tied to Daniel Hartman's debts. Execution-style gunshot to the head. A bullet meant for silence, not warning. In Victor's jacket pocket, wrapped in a sandwich bag, was a flash drive. At the station, Claudia decrypted the files. Her voice was steady as she explained, but her hands trembled. "It's financial records, offshore accounts, shell companies, and money routed through Hartman Construction and the mayor's office. This isn't petty fraud. It's systemic laundering." Lena's face paled. Emily was right. She had the receipts, and now anyone who touched those accounts is a target. Sullivan nodded grimly, which means the body count isn't finished. That evening, the Hartmans gathered at their estate. Richard slammed his fist against the dining table, rattling the silverware. First Emily, then Sarah disappears. Now Daniel's debts are paraded in public. They're dismantling us piece by piece. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though her tears never fell. "It's that detective," she hissed. "He's feeding the press, humiliating us." Daniel sat slumped, eyes hollow. "This is bigger than him. They're clearing the board, and we're the pawns," Richard glared. "Then we stop playing like pawns." What none of them knew was that Sullivan had already bugged the estate study. From the van outside, he and Lena listened. The words confirmed what they'd suspected. The Hartmans were fractured, desperate, and hiding. 2 nights later, the 5th funeral was announced. Only this time, the victim wasn't buried in silence. Philip Garner, Claudia's mentor, was found dead in his car, engine running, exhaust pipe sealed with duct tape. Officially, it was staged as suicide, but Claudia's trembling analysis told another story. The angle of the duct tape, the bruising on his wrist, he didn't do this to himself. He was silenced. The news rippled through Riverton like a shockwave. Garner had been the gatekeeper of the forensic files. With him gone, questions rose louder. Who would benefit from his silence, and who had the power to stage his death so convincingly? Sullivan stared at the board that night. 5 murders now: Emily, Tom, Rachel, Helen, and Philip. Plus Victor, if they counted him as more than a pawn. Each death connected by threads of corruption and fear, yet Emily still glowed different. Her wounds, her missing journals, her recordings, they told a separate story. But the town didn't care about distinctions. The town only knew that Riverton was bleeding. The press demanded answers. Evelyn Whitmore delivered them with ice-cold confidence. Standing at the podium, she declared, "The shadow killer will be found. Riverton will not live in fear." Her words steadied the town, but Sullivan recognized the smirk beneath. Evelyn thrived in chaos. Each death made her voice stronger. That night, Lena pored over the decrypted ledgers from Victor's flash drive. "Look here," she said, pointing to a series of payments. "These accounts don't just connect Hartman Construction and City Hall. They connect to out-of-town donors, politicians, judges. Emily wasn't just poking Riverton, she was pulling a thread tied to half the state." Sullivan rubbed his tired eyes, and somebody made sure she'd never finish pulling. As they spoke, an officer rushed in with breaking news. Shots fired at Riverton High. Sullivan and Lena sped to the school, tires screaming against wet asphalt. They arrived to find chaos. Students herded outside, teachers trembling. In the parking lot, a car burned, flames licking the night sky. Inside the driver's seat was a charred body. The ID in the glove box belonged to Eric Bennett, Sarah Hartman's fiancé. The fire chief muttered, "Accelerant poured from the trunk. Whoever did this wanted him erased completely." Lena covered her mouth. "That's 6. But Sullivan wasn't counting. He was connecting. Eric had held the burner phone with Emily's recordings. He had handed it over only days before. Now he was gone. "Somebody's cleaning up," Sullivan said. "One by one, anyone tied to Emily's voice is disappearing." The headlines the next morning screamed, "Serial killer terrorizes Riverton." The FBI was mentioned now, whispers of federal jurisdiction. But Riverton didn't want outsiders. Riverton wanted to believe the nightmare would end if they just kept quiet. Sullivan knew better. The nightmare was only beginning. He lit another cigarette, staring at Emily's photo on the board. Her eyes seemed to follow him, pleading. The rest of the town thought she was the first victim of a spree. But Sullivan was certain now. Emily wasn't the first thread in the chain. Emily was her own chain entirely, and her murderer was still hidden in plain sight. The fire that consumed Eric Bennett's car smoldered long into the night. By morning, the parking lot at Riverton High smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline. Students left flowers near the chain-link fence, their faces pale, their whispers carried on the autumn wind. The police chief called it a tragic accident, but no one in Riverton believed that. Eric hadn't been clumsy, he had been silenced. Detective Sullivan stood at the edge of the wreckage, smoke curling upward like a warning. He ground his cigarette into the asphalt. First, he gives us Emily's recordings, he muttered to Lena. Then he ends up roasted alive. That's not a coincidence. That's a cleanup job. Lena's voice trembled. Which means whoever listened to those recordings knows we have them now. The station grew quieter after Eric's death. Officers who once whispered theories stopped talking altogether, their eyes darting toward shadows as though the walls themselves were listening. Claudia spent her nights in the lab, refusing to go home. She told Sullivan she didn't trust anyone, not even herself anymore. 2 days later, the 7th body appeared. A jogger found it in Riverton Park, sprawled beneath the bleachers near the old baseball diamond. The victim was Mason Lee, the IT fixer who had helped Richard Hartman erase digital footprints. His throat was cut, his body dumped like trash. In his jacket pocket was a folded slip of paper soaked in blood. Sullivan unfolded it carefully. The message was handwritten in block letters. "Stop pulling threads." Lena stared at the note, her knuckles white. It's not just intimidation anymore, they're taunting us. Or warning us, Sullivan said grimly. Every person tied to Emily's investigation is being eliminated. Someone is making sure the truth stays buried. That evening, Sullivan drove to the Hartman estate. Richard met him at the door, his face lined with rage and exhaustion. "You think I killed Mason?" Richard barked. "He worked for me, damn it. He protected us." "He protected you from exposure," Sullivan corrected. "Now he's dead, just like Emily, just like Tom, just like Helen. How many more before you admit your family is in this up to its neck?" Richard's shoulders sagged. For a moment he looked less like a titan of Riverton and more like a cornered man. "Detective," he whispered, "you don't understand. We're not controlling this. We're surviving it. Evelyn Whitmore, she's the one running this town now. She decides who lives and who doesn't." Sullivan left the estate with those words echoing in his head. Evelyn. Always Evelyn. At City Hall, Evelyn Whitmore was already spinning Mason Lee's death into another speech. She called him a troubled man and promised tighter curfews, more patrols, more order. Riverton clung to her like a drowning victim to driftwood. James Whitmore, the mayor, sat silently at her side, his eyes hollow. Sullivan wondered if he even realized his own irrelevance anymore. That night, Lena followed a lead on her own. She visited St. Jude's Church, where Pastor Cole had quietly buried secrets for decades. He pulled her aside, voice trembling. "Emily came here the day before she died," he confessed. "She left me an envelope, told me to keep it safe. I didn't open it. I was afraid. But after all that's happened." He handed it to her. The paper yellowed at the edges. Inside were photocopies of checks, each signed by different shell companies, but all tracing back to the same account, Evelyn Whitmore's private foundation. The sums were large, funneled through charities disguised as community projects. "She was following the money," Lena whispered. "Straight to Evelyn." When Sullivan saw the documents, he slammed his fist onto the desk. "That's it. That's the motive for half these murders. Anyone who sniffed near Evelyn's finances was eliminated. Tom, Rachel, Helen, Mason, even Eric. They all touched her trail." But Emily, Lena asked. Why did she die first if her murder doesn't match the others? Sullivan stared at Emily's photo on the board. Her eyes seemed to pierce him even now. Because Emily's murder wasn't Evelyn's work. It was someone else, someone closer. The revelation hung heavy in the room. 3 nights later, Riverton gathered for a candlelight vigil in the town square. The names of the dead were read aloud. Emily Hartman, Tom Bradley, Rachel Carter, Helen Myers, Philip Garner, Victor Ramirez, Eric Bennett, Mason Lee. 8 names, 8 shadows. Evelyn Whitmore stood at the microphone, her voice calm and commanding. We will not live in fear, she declared. Riverton is stronger than its enemies. The crowd applauded, desperate for reassurance. But Sullivan noticed the way she scanned the crowd, calculating, measuring loyalty. Lena leaned close. She's not protecting Riverton. She's protecting herself. Then we prove it, Sullivan said, and we use Emily's voice to do it. Because somewhere, hidden still, were Emily's missing journals. And Sullivan knew that inside those pages lay the key, not just to Riverton's corruption, but to separating Emily's killer from the rest. For now, the murders kept piling. The bodies kept falling, and the town kept clinging to the wrong savior. Riverton was bleeding in public, and the killers were writing the story in private. And in the silence after Evelyn's speech, Sullivan swore he could hear Emily whisper again, "Don't trust anyone." The candlelight vigil burned into the night. Flickers of flame scattered across Riverton's town square. It should have been a symbol of unity, but Sullivan saw only fear. People held their candles like weapons against the dark, whispering prayers, whispering names. And above them all, Evelyn Whitmore stood like a queen presiding over her trembling court. When the vigil ended, Sullivan and Lena walked back to the station. The night air felt sharp, heavy with the sense that another body would turn up before dawn. They weren't wrong. At 3 a.m., the call came in. A gunshot, a scream, a body found near the edge of Riverton Cemetery. The victim was Chief Hal Peterson, the very man who had fed Sullivan the gala generator logs. He lay on the gravel road, one bullet in his chest, another in his head. Execution. His badge was gone, ripped from his uniform. On his phone was a text he hadn't sent. "Meet me by the graves. I have the journals." Lena's face drained of color. They lured him, used Emily's journals to bait him. Sullivan crouched by the body, cigarette unlit between his fingers. And now the only man who slipped us evidence is dead. That's not coincidence. That's punishment. By sunrise, Riverton had lost its police chief. The mayor's office announced Evelyn would help oversee coordination with state officials. Another power shift, another step in her quiet coup. The officers at the station grew restless. Some whispered of quitting, others of leaving town altogether. Riverton wasn't a police job anymore. It was survival. Claudia cornered Sullivan in the hall. Her voice was ragged, her hands trembling. "They're closing in. Philip's dead, Hal's dead, I'm next. You don't understand. Once you question the story, you're marked." Sullivan grabbed her shoulders. "Then you stay close to us. We'll keep you alive." But in his gut, he knew the shadows didn't need guns to kill. They could smother a life with silence, with whispers, with fear. Later that day, Lena traced more financial records. She discovered a second set of payments moving through shell companies. These linked not to Evelyn, but to Margaret Hartman. Smaller sums, but consistent. And always labeled with one cryptic note, retainer. Retainer for what? Lena asked. Sullivan stared at Margaret's photo on the board. For a service, a silence, maybe for a killer. The realization lodged like a shard in his mind. Emily's murder had never matched the others. And now Margaret's money trail pointed to a personal motive. That night he returned to the Hartman estate. Margaret was alone in the parlor, the house dim and heavy. She poured him tea with practiced grace, her eyes sharp even through her performance. "Detective," she said coolly, "then why do you haunt my house?" "Because Emily's voice still haunts mine," Sullivan replied. "And because your money trails tell a story your lips won't." Margaret froze. For one flicker of a second, her mask slipped. Then she smiled faintly. Money always tells stories, but stories can be fiction. Sullivan leaned forward. Emily wasn't killed by Evelyn. Emily wasn't killed by Whitmore politics. She was killed by someone closer, someone who feared what she might reveal. Margaret's hands trembled on the porcelain. "Careful, detective, you don't know the cost of truth." "I know the cost of silence," Sullivan said. 8 bodies and counting." He left before she could answer, but her expression told him everything. Margaret was hiding more than grief. The next day, the violence spread further. A small explosion ripped through a warehouse tied to Hartman Construction. No casualties, but the building burned to ash. The fire marshal called it arson. Lena pieced it together quickly. "They're not just killing people, they're erasing paper trails. First the ledgers, now the buildings. And the only unburned record left," Sullivan said, "is in Emily's missing journals." That night, Sullivan drove to the school where Sarah once worked. He walked the hallways in the dark, the lockers echoing every step. In the back classroom, he found the locked cabinet Lena had mentioned weeks earlier. It had been forced open, empty. Someone else had already found Emily's journals. When he stepped outside, a figure waited at the edge of the parking lot. It was Sarah Hartman, alive. Hood pulled over her head, eyes darting like a hunted animal. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You shouldn't be hiding," Sullivan countered. Tears streaked her cheeks. "You don't understand. Emily wasn't just chasing corruption, she was chasing our mother, Margaret. Emily found proof she was laundering money through Dad's business. Proof that could ruin us. And the night she died, she was going to confront her." Sullivan's cigarette shook between his fingers. "You're saying Margaret killed her own daughter?" Sarah sobbed. "She didn't swing the weapon, but she arranged it, paid for it. I found the transfers. I ran because I knew if I stayed I'd be next." The truth was a weight Sullivan had carried for weeks, but hearing it from Sarah's lips made it real. Emily's murder had been a family betrayal. Not Evelyn's conspiracy, not Riverton's politics, blood against blood. But even as Sarah confessed, Sullivan knew it wasn't the end. Margaret might have ordered Emily's death, but Evelyn Whitmore was the one cleaning the rest of the board. 2 killers, 2 motives tangled into one nightmare. The shadows weren't walking alone in Riverton. They were walking side by side. Sullivan didn't arrest Sarah under the parking lot lights. He put her in the cruiser, drove without siren, just the tick of the turn signal each time Riverton changed direction beneath his wheels. She stared at the cage like it was confession. "I didn't want her dead," she said. "I wanted her to stop." "At telling the truth?" "At burning the house down with us inside," Sarah whispered. "Emily thought justice was a cure. In this town, it's a match." He parked behind St. Jude's and took her through the side door. Pastor Cole met them with a lantern and a sleepless face. The stained glass made the dark look holy. "Safe here?" Sarah asked. "As safe as fear permits," the pastor said. Sullivan locked her in a small office and promised a morning statement. He kept her phone battery. Lena arrived with coffee. "Evelyn's office wants a 9 a.m. briefing and access to transcripts." "She'll get last week's weather," Sullivan said. Claudia texted a screenshot. Lab access log shifted by 2 minutes, just enough to break chain of custody. Beneath, Philip wasn't the only one. Sullivan called the interim chief and got a speech about process. The machine talked without saying anything. At dawn, Sarah signed a short affidavit. Emily planned to confront their mother. Money moved through Hartman Construction. Fear ran the town. She stopped before names. "You'll have them when I have air." Sullivan stepped outside to call the DA. A van rolled by too slowly. The third brake light pulsed, then died. The side door slid. A shot cracked the church doorframe where his head had been. Another shattered the office window. Sarah screamed. Pastor Cole yanked her down. Sullivan fired twice into fog. The van fishtailed away. "They moved fast," Lena said, crouched by splinters. "Somebody told them we had her," Sullivan said, "or saw the future." Evelyn asked for transcripts. An hour later, the saints eat bullets. They moved Sarah to a safe house on the edge of town. Mr. Alvarez's sister's place, 2 rooms and a nervous dog. Sullivan assigned 2 uniforms he barely trusted and told them he'd end their paychecks if she died. That afternoon, Lena proposed bait. "Leak that Emily's journals are in the evidence locker. See who comes to touch the lock." They spread the rumor with surgical gossip. Near midnight, a man in a gray hoodie tried a copied card, failed, reached for a screwdriver. Sullivan pinned him to the tile. "You're making an error," the man said calmly. "Name. Does it matter? I transport things, a purse, a note, a person. I don't ask." "Who pays you?" "A woman who likes clean rooms," he said, "and speeches." "Say her name. Names are for eulogies." In his pocket, a burner with 1 number labeled Mother and a brass key stamped with a tiny book. The library. An hour later, Sullivan walked the deepest stack at Riverton Public. In the far corner, a vent cover wore fresh scratches. The brass key turned. Behind the grate, plastic-wrapped notebooks stacked like bricks. Emily's handwriting bled through the first cover. "Do not trust the obvious." He didn't lift them. He closed the grate and kept the key. He wanted a warrant, cameras, an audience that couldn't be edited. He called Lena. "The story isn't lost," he said. "It's patient. Then we win if we are too." By morning, rumor had outrun plan. Evelyn announced a task force tour of the station to celebrate transparency. Sullivan smiled and moved the bait locker to a closet full of brooms. He signed the library warrant and asked Pastor Cole to host a noon prayer. Crowds for cover, cameras for proof. At 11:40, the gray van drifted past the safe house. Inside, Sarah rinsed a cup with shaking hands. The dogs slept. Mr. Alvarez's sister watched daytime court on mute. Lena reached the library as the bells began. The clerk watched officers roll cameras. Sullivan lifted the grate and the room inhaled. The notebooks came out like organs. The first page named dates. The second named routes. The third named a meeting, R. Thursday. Garden lot. Garden lot equals Hartman headquarters, Lena said. Thursday was the night she died. Sullivan turned the next page. Transfers with initials that weren't codes but names. MH every other line. EW every third. And one lone R sitting by itself like a chair at the head of a table. Sirens rose outside, not police. Fire. Dispatch cracked. Unit 3, structure blaze at the safe house. Possible entrapment. Sullivan ran. Tires screamed. Smoke drew a black map over the roof. He barreled through the door with his jacket over his face. The kitchen coughed flame. He found Sarah in the hallway coughing apologies and dragged her into daylight while the dog howled at a sky that wouldn't help. Lena arrived, soot already on her sleeves. "They moved the fire before we could move the truth," she said. Sullivan watched the roof sag. "No more funerals," he said to the town and to himself. Not for her, not for truth. That night, when the hoses hissed to silence, he opened a scanned copy of Emily's notebooks at his kitchen table, the originals under seal. He read until dawn, And as the birds tested morning, he finally understood why Riverton felt like a script and a trap at once. Two authors were writing on the same page with different inks. One named Margaret, one named Evelyn. And every time truth bled through, someone painted over it with fire. He closed the file and stared at the wall until the paint looked like rain. Somewhere, a van cooled in a garage. A woman rehearsed a speech, and a mother counted her pearls like rosary beads. Somewhere the river carried ashes past the bridge where it began. He dialed Lena. "Tomorrow we break the pattern," he said. "How?" "We stop chasing shadows and start serving light. We go public, names and dates. We make lying expensive. Now." The forensic evidence that changed everything. Riverton woke to the smoke of another burned house, and the whispers of betrayal carried on every street corner. The fire at Sarah Hartman's safe house didn't kill her, but it left the town convinced no one was safe, not even under police guard. The newspapers doubled down on the name now etched into every headline: the Shadow Killer. Detective Sullivan hated the phrase. There wasn't one killer. There never had been. Emily's journals confirmed what his gut already knew. Two different hands were steering the violence. One born of family betrayal, the other sharpened by ambition and politics. But proof in Riverton meant nothing unless it could survive the forensics, and the forensics were compromised. That morning, Claudia Reynolds stormed into the station with a box clutched to her chest. Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse, but her determination was steel. "I broke into Philip's archive," she confessed. "The originals are still there. Blood samples, fibers, photos. He didn't destroy them, he just buried them under fake reports." Sullivan pried open the box. Inside were sealed evidence bags marked with case numbers that had been marked closed. Among them was Emily Hartman's blouse, blood-stained and torn. Claudia's hands trembled as she held it. "Look at the pattern," she whispered. "The strangulation marks don't line up with the supposed sequence. She was strangled first, not last. That means her killer wasn't staging a robbery or a random attack. It was personal, intimate. They wanted her silenced, then made it look like something else." Lena leaned over the table, her voice barely audible. "That clears her murder from the others completely." "Exactly," Claudia said. Emily's case was blended into the others with doctored photos, but the originals show a different story. Sullivan felt a weight settle into his chest. The confirmation he'd been chasing for weeks was finally in his hands. Emily's murder was separate. Her journals were right. The relief was short-lived. Claudia pulled another bag from the box. "This is from Tom Bradley's apartment. Ballistics were swapped. The bullet that killed him wasn't fired from the weapon logged in evidence. That means someone planted a fake gun and Philip signed off on it." Sullivan lit a cigarette, staring at the smoke. "So the story isn't just being twisted, it's being rewritten from the ground up." "And it gets worse," Claudia said. She slid a final folder across the desk. Inside was a DNA report hidden beneath layers of false documentation. The sample was from under Rachel Carter's fingernails. It didn't match Roy Carter, her husband, who'd been rotting in a cell on suspicion of killing her. It matched someone else entirely. "Who?" Lena asked. Claudia's voice cracked. "Evelyn Whitmore." The silence in the room was absolute. Sullivan crushed his cigarette into the tray. "So the mayor's wife didn't just orchestrate cover-ups, she got her hands dirty." The revelation was explosive, but it raised a dangerous question. If Evelyn's DNA tied her directly to Rachel's death, why hadn't she been exposed already? Who was shielding her? And why? Later that night, Sullivan and Lena drove to the cemetery where Chief Hal Peterson had been murdered. They stood under the cold glow of the lamps, staring at the spot where his body had been found. He said he had Emily's journals, Lena murmured. But he didn't. He was lured here. Because he was about to break the chain, Sullivan said. Hal started feeding us pieces. That made him a liability. They walked in silence until Lena finally asked, "So what now?" "We have evidence pointing to Evelyn. We have proof Emily's case is separate. Why not go public?" "Because going public gets us buried with them," Sullivan replied. "We need one move that sticks. We need to break Riverton's story wide open in front of everyone so it can't be rewritten again." The next morning, Sullivan stood in the coroner's lab while Claudia ran the DNA test a second time, then a third. Each result matched Evelyn Whitmore. Claudia's hands shook as she sealed the report. "They'll kill me for this," she whispered. "Not if we kill the story first," Sullivan said. That afternoon, Evelyn called another press conference on the courthouse steps. She wore black gloves, a pearl necklace, and the calm smile of a woman who owned every headline. "Riverton is strong," she declared. "The so-called shadow killer will face justice. Trust in your leaders." Sullivan stood in the crowd, Emily's journals under his arm, Claudia's DNA report in his coat pocket. He didn't move, not yet. Timing was everything. If he exposed Evelyn too soon, the system would bury it. He needed the right moment, the right audience, the right undeniable proof. As Evelyn shook hands with townsfolk, Sullivan's phone buzzed. A message with no sender. Next on the list, you know who. He showed it to Lena. She read it, her face tightening. Sarah. Sullivan lit another cigarette, eyes fixed on Evelyn's flawless smile. Then we get to her first. The message haunted Sullivan all the way to the safe house where Sarah Hartman had been hiding. The small bungalow sat at the edge of town, its porch light burned out, curtains drawn tight. 2 patrol cars were parked out front, but the officers inside looked uneasy, hands resting too often on their holsters. Sarah met them at the door. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes ringed with shadows. "I heard about Eric," she whispered. "Then Mason. Then Hal. It's only a matter of time, isn't it?" "Not if you stay quiet and stay hidden," Sullivan said. "I've been quiet my whole life," she snapped. "Look where that got Emily. Look where it's gotten me." Sullivan glanced at Lena, who was watching Sarah closely. "You told me Margaret arranged Emily's death. Are you ready to put that in writing?" Sarah hesitated. Her lip trembled. "If I do, my mother will kill me herself. You think Evelyn's dangerous? Margaret is worse. She doesn't need power. She has family. That's stronger." Before Sullivan could answer, one of the officers called from outside. "Detective, we've got movement at the perimeter." Sullivan rushed onto the porch. A dark SUV idled at the edge of the street, its headlights snapped on, flooding the safe house. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it sped off into the night. "Testing us," Sullivan muttered, "seeing if we're awake." The officers were rattled. Sarah was shaking. Lena pressed her shoulder gently. "You're safe here. We won't let them touch you." But Sullivan knew better. Safety was a myth in Riverton. The following morning, Claudia called with urgency in her voice. "You need to see this. Now." At the lab, she laid out 2 sets of forensic photos side by side, Emily's original autopsy and Rachel Carter's. "Notice the strangulation marks," Claudia said. "Emily's are consistent with a left-handed grip. Rachel's are right-handed, but the official reports list them as identical. Someone forced the narrative into symmetry that doesn't exist." Sullivan frowned. "You're saying 2 different killers. Opposite-handed?" "Yes," Claudia confirmed. "It's more proof the murders don't belong together. Emily's killer was left-handed. Evelyn is right-handed." Lena leaned in, eyes wide. "Then Evelyn didn't kill Emily." No, Claudia said one, but she killed Rachel. The DNA proves it. The room felt heavier with every revelation. Emily's death was personal, intimate, a betrayal by her own blood. Rachel's was political, a silencing orchestrated by Evelyn Whitmore. Sullivan rubbed his temples. 2 killers, 2 motives, one web tangled together. That afternoon, Sullivan visited the cemetery again, this time alone. He lit a cigarette and walked the rows of graves until he reached Emily's. "You were right," he muttered. "You said R knew. You said not to trust anyone. You weren't just warning me. You were warning yourself." The wind carried the smell of wet earth. For a moment, Sullivan imagined he could hear Emily's voice whispering through the grass. "Closer than you think." At City Hall, Evelyn held another closed-door meeting with the council. Sullivan didn't attend, but his contact on the inside fed him details. She was pushing for curfews, expanded police powers, and a temporary suspension of press access. "She's consolidating," Lena said when Sullivan relayed the news. "Every murder strengthens her grip, and the town is too scared to resist." Sullivan lit another cigarette. "Then we don't play by town rules. We take it federal." He called an FBI contact, Agent Monroe, and set a midnight meeting at a diner off the interstate. Monroe listened quietly as Sullivan laid out the evidence. Emily's original autopsy, Rachel's DNA match to Evelyn, the financial ledgers from Victor Ramirez. When Sullivan finished, Monroe shook his head. "It's good, but it's not enough. Courts won't touch it unless the chain of custody is ironclad. And right now, half your evidence has been doctored or passed through compromised hands." "Then what will it take?" Sullivan growled. "Catch her in the act," Monroe said. "Something undeniable, something public." Sullivan left the diner with a bitter taste in his mouth. Catching Evelyn Whitmore in the act was like trying to trap smoke. 2 nights later, Riverton hosted a town hall in the old high school gym. Evelyn stood at the front, microphone in hand, radiating control. "We will not give in to fear," she declared. "We will rebuild. We will heal. And we will stand united." The crowd applauded, desperate for her certainty. Sullivan stood at the back with Lena, watching every gesture. Midway through the event, a commotion erupted near the doors. A man stumbled in, bloodied, clutching his chest. It was Mason Lee's younger brother, shouting, "They killed him! They killed Mason for protecting the Hartmans!" Gasps rippled through the gym. Evelyn signaled for order, her smile brittle but intact. But Sullivan noticed something. In the chaos, Evelyn slipped a small envelope to Richard Hartman. His hand shook as he pocketed it. Lena leaned close. "You saw that?" "I saw it," Sullivan whispered, "and I'll bet whatever's in that envelope ties them together." After the town hall, Sullivan followed Richard's car back to the estate. Hours later, he broke into the study and found the envelope tucked inside a drawer. Inside was a single page of ledger entries, handwritten, marked with initials. M.H. repeated again and again. Margaret Hartman. Emily had been right. Her mother wasn't just complicit, she was central. Margaret had arranged Emily's death to protect the family, while Evelyn orchestrated the others to protect her empire. 2 women. 2 killers. 1 town swallowed by both. Sullivan stared at the ledger, his jaw tightening. He'd uncovered the truth, but truth alone wouldn't stop them. The only way forward was to drag Riverton's secrets into the light where no amount of doctored forensics or political speeches could cover them again. And that meant playing Evelyn Whitmore at her own game, making the next move public, undeniable, and irreversible. The night Sullivan stole the ledger page from Richard Hartman's study, he barely slept. He kept turning the paper in his hands. The ink smudged just enough to show it had been written quickly, nervously. M.H. over and over. Margaret Hartman's initials. Margaret paying for silence. Margaret paying for protection. Margaret paying for blood. By dawn, he was back at the station, staring at the board. Emily's photo glared at him from the center, her eyes captured forever in the police headshot. Around her, Tom Bradley, Rachel Carter, Helen Myers, Philip Garner, Victor Ramirez, Eric Bennett, Mason Lee, Chief Hal Peterson. 9 faces, 9 graves. And now, one truth that cut through them. Emily's death wasn't tangled in Evelyn's empire. It was her mother's doing. Lena entered with 2 coffees, her hair tied back in a messy knot. "You look like you've been awake since 1995, she muttered, sliding him a cup. "Margaret paid for Emily's silence," Sullivan said flatly. "The ledger proves it." Lena blinked, then sank into the chair opposite him. "So Evelyn orchestrates the cover-ups, the political killings, the power grab. And Margaret? She killed her own daughter." "2 killers, 2 motives," Sullivan replied. "And they both played us by making it look like one." At noon, Sullivan met Claudia at the lab. She had Emily's blouse under the microscope again, magnifying the blood fibers. "I ran one more test," she said. "Skin cells under the fingernails. They don't belong to Evelyn or Richard or Daniel. They belong to a female, close familial match. Odds are 99% it's Margaret." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "That's it then. Margaret Hartman strangled Emily." Claudia nodded grimly. "But if you want this to stick, you can't arrest her in the dark. The whole town has to see it. Otherwise, the evidence disappears again." He thought of Monroe's warning. Catch her in the act. Make it undeniable. That evening, Sullivan visited Sarah at the safe house again. She sat hunched over the kitchen table, hands clasped as though praying. "She killed Emily, didn't she?" Sarah whispered when she saw his face. "Your mother paid for it," Sullivan admitted, "and Evelyn buried it under other bodies." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I told Emily to stop. I begged her, but she wouldn't. She said the truth was worth it. I didn't think our own mother—" Her words broke into sobs. Sullivan let her cry. He'd seen this before. The moment when suspicion hardened into fact, when family turned to poison. When she calmed, he leaned close. "Sarah, you want justice for Emily? Then you'll testify. Not just about Margaret, but about Evelyn, too. You've seen them both at work." Sarah wiped her eyes, trembling. "If I testify, I'm dead." "You already were," Sullivan said, "running, hiding, burning. This way, at least you get to choose the ending." The next morning, Sullivan made his move. He called a press conference, not at City Hall, not at the station, but in the Riverton High gym where the town had gathered before. He invited the press, the council, the Whitmores, and the Hartmans. He wanted the whole town in one room. When the day arrived, the bleachers filled quickly. People whispered, fear etched into their faces. Evelyn Whitmore entered in her immaculate black suit, her pearls gleaming, her husband trailing silently behind her. Richard and Margaret Hartman followed, flanked by Daniel, pale and twitching. Sullivan stepped to the microphone, cigarette unlit in his hand. "Riverton has been living in shadows," he said, his voice carrying through the gym. "But shadows don't kill people. People kill people, and tonight you're going to hear the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she stayed silent. Sullivan gestured, and Claudia rolled in a projector cart. On the screen appeared Emily's autopsy photos side by side, the doctored version and the original. "This," Sullivan said, pointing to the first, "is the lie we were given, and this," he tapped the second, "so it is the truth. Emily Hartman was strangled before she was struck. A crime of intimacy, not conspiracy. A crime from inside her family. Margaret's face went white. Richard's jaw clenched. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn simply smiled. Sullivan continued. DNA under Emily's fingernails proves she fought her killer. That DNA matches a female relative. The odds are near certain. And Emily's journals recovered from the Riverton Library show she was preparing to confront the woman she believed would silence her. He paused, then said it. That woman was her mother, Margaret Hartman. The gym erupted in gasps, shouts, cries. Margaret rose to her feet, shaking her head violently. Lies! All lies! She shrieked. My daughter was troubled, reckless. Her voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's eyes. Evelyn watched with the calm of a predator, saying nothing, letting Margaret sink. Sullivan raised his hand. And if you think Margaret acted alone, you're wrong. Because while she killed Emily Abode, Evelyn Whitmore silenced the rest. Rachel Carter, Helen Myers, Mason Lee, and anyone else who threatened her empire. DNA evidence ties her directly to Rachel's death. Financial records trace dirty money through her foundation. Every corpse since Emily is hers. The gym fell silent, the town frozen in shock. Evelyn finally stood, her voice icy. Detective Sullivan, you've just accused two of Riverton's most respected women of murder. Do you have any idea the weight of your words? Sullivan lit his cigarette at last, the flame cutting through the tension. Yeah. They weigh exactly as much as the dead. The fallout began immediately. Reporters shouted questions. Police officers looked to one another for orders. Richard Hartman stormed out, dragging Margaret by the arm as she screamed denials. Evelyn simply walked, serene, her husband trailing like a shadow. But Sullivan knew this wasn't victory. It was only the beginning. He had ripped the mask off Riverton, but masks had a way of regrowing. That night he returned to his office, exhausted. The board of faces still stared at him. But for the first time, Emily's photo seemed lighter, as though her voice had finally been heard. Lena sat across from him. You know they won't go quietly, she said. No, Sullivan agreed. But now the whole town knows their names, and once truth leaves your mouth, it can't be unspoken. He looked out the window at Riverton, a town still drowning in shadows. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, the shadows had shapes and names. The town hall detonated like a headline. By morning, yard signs came down, church groups split down the middle, and Riverton's talk radio fed on words like murder investigation, forensic evidence, DNA match, true crime conspiracy, small town corruption. Evelyn Whitmore called Sullivan's presentation reckless theatrics, then hired 2 crisis firms and 3 lawyers. Margaret Hartman released a statement written in the grammar of denial, sorrow, prayer, slander. No one slept. Claudia's lab access was suspended before noon, pending review. She packed her microscope slides in a shoebox and left through a side door with the caution of a hunted witness. In the parking lot, she whispered, they're moving to suppress. If the chain of custody collapses, everything does. Then we widen the chain, Sullivan said. He digitized Emily's journals. The autopsy originals, the blood spatter images, and the Rachel DNA report, then seeded encrypted copies with Agent Monroe, Pastor Cole, the county clerk, 2 investigative reporters, and a judge who owed him an old debt. If they burn one house, he told Lena, the truth still lives in 6. Evelyn staged her counterpunch at City Hall, a live broadcast under flags and chandeliers. A veteran detective misled this community, she said. He stole protected records and weaponized grief. She announced a civil suit and hinted at criminal charges. The mayor stood beside her like a portrait hung slightly crooked. "Riverton is safe," he recited. The town didn't believe it. That afternoon, the DA called Sullivan into chambers with a voice like a slammed file. "You forced my hand. Either I convene a grand jury now or this dies in injunctions." He flipped a folder. Witness lists, preliminary counts. "If you're wrong, they bury us. If you're right, they try to bury you first." "Do it," Sullivan said. "Start with Margaret. Keep Evelyn warm." Back at the safe house, Sarah watched news loops in silence. When Margaret's statement rolled again, she swayed. "She'll never admit it," she said. "She'll stand on my sister's grave and say the wind killed her." Lena squeezed her shoulder. "Then we don't wait for her confession. We write the truth in ink she can't scrub." Toward dusk, a black SUV crept past the bungalow and didn't return. 15 minutes later, Sullivan's phone dinged. A sealed court order to surrender all materials related to Rachel Carter's case. The signature belonged to a visiting judge who played golf with the mayor. Lena read it twice. "They're trying to vacuum the room," Sullivan smiled without mirth. "Let them try." He'd filed the Rachel DNA under a separate number that morning, chain of custody anchored to Monroe and the county clerk. If City Hall seized one, they'd still be 3 steps behind. Claudia called from a motel with paper-thin walls. "I'm not safe," she said. "Philip's old contacts are circling, and I found something else, an override log in the forensic software. Not just altered images, timestamps rewritten, calibration locked by an admin key. The tag reads office, no name, just authority. Print it, sign it, notarize it," Sullivan said. "Turn it into a witness." The grand jury convened at 7 p.m. in a building that smelled of bleach and indignation. Sullivan swore in, then walked 12 citizens through the bones of the case. The doctored photos, the genuine bruising, the DNA, the money. He didn't say monster or mastermind. He said sequence, motive, access, control. When he finished, the room felt smaller. "We'll hear from Ms. Reynolds tomorrow," the foreperson said, "and from Ms. Hartman when she's served." A bailiff delivered the Margaret subpoena to the estate gate as floodlights came on like judgment. Evelyn moved faster. At 8:19 p.m., a statement appeared on every screen in town. "An individual has confessed to the tragic string of crimes. Out of respect, we will protect their identity until due process." The words were silk over a snare. Lena's phone lit with messages. "Case closed? Serial killer caught?" The narrative was snapping back into the shape power preferred. "Who's the sacrificial lamb?" Sullivan asked. "Someone already dead," Lena said. "Philip or Mason. Someone who can't contradict her." They didn't get the luxury of guessing. At 9:03 p.m., sirens cut the night. A unit at the evidence annex reported a break-in. By the time Sullivan arrived, the lock was cleanly cored, the hard drive cabinet open, a single shelf emptied. Bradley ballistics, Carter DNA backups, Myers pool samples, not everything. Just enough to argue doubt. Sullivan walked the aisle, breathing slow. "They didn't come to rob," he said. "They came to stage an argument." He went straight to the county clerk. The clerk's hand shook as he slid a second set of sealed copies across the counter. "You didn't get these from me," he whispered, "and I never saw you." At midnight, a courier delivered a padded envelope to Sullivan's house. No return address. Inside, a flash drive labeled Deep Archivist and a note. "If you want the part you missed, check the garden from the east, not the west." The drive contained a single video, grainy night footage from the Hartman headquarters lot. A woman in pearls stood in the spill of a security light, arguing with a figure whose face never turned to camera. Emily stepped into frame, chin lifted. The woman in pearls raised a hand, not striking, pointing. past Emily toward the east fence. 3 minutes later, Emily left alone. The timestamp matched the night she died. "This isn't the murder," Lena said, "but it's the thread." Emily had walked into a trap, not into an accident. The R garden lot meeting from her notebook, arranged under the same pearls. Sullivan forwarded the clip to Monroe, then to the grand jury clerk. He knew Evelyn's team would scream about authenticity. He'd already cued the metadata expert. At 2:11 a.m., a patrol car outside the safe house erupted in flame. The uniforms dragged a coughing officer away as the hood roared like a furnace. In the orange wash, a silhouette stood at the corner and watched, not hiding, performing. When the backup siren grew, the figure vanished. Sarah shook uncontrollably. Pastor Cole prayed until his voice broke. Sullivan stared into the fire the way a man stares into a verdict. "They're done whispering," he said. "They're writing in fire." He made the next move equally loud. At dawn, he called a public forum on the courthouse steps, not a speech but an upload. Claudia, pale but steady, held up the override log and read it out loud, every fake timestamp like a nail driven straight. The county clerk swore the duplicates. Monroe stood unsmiling and said 3 words that changed the air. "Federal Task Force." Evelyn responded with a smile and a warrant served on Sullivan personally for evidence theft and defamation. Cameras drank it like wine. He turned for the microphones. "You can arrest a person," he said. "You can't arrest the truth." Behind him, 6 sealed envelopes went by registered mail to 6 outlets with 1 embargo. Noon. At 11:58 a.m., the church bells began. At noon, the embargo lifted. The autopsy originals, the DNA match, the garden lot footage, the ledgers, the lab override logs, posted, mirrored, archived. True crime channels, mystery forums, and local feeds exploded. Riverton's crime thriller stopped being rumor. It became record. Margaret Hartman's attorney called to negotiate a surrender. Evelyn's lawyers filed for a restraining order and got a hearing. But the judge opened with the federal presence and a frown that said not today. The mayor canceled a press conference and released a written note about cooperation that read like retreat. That evening, Sullivan walked the bridge where Emily had been found. The river moved with its old, indifferent rhythm. He thought of blood spatter, chain of custody, serial killer headlines, and the small, brave things that still counted. A librarian who looked the other way, a clerk who made extra copies, a pastor who unlocked a side door, a scientist who refused to let the truth be reformatted. Lena joined him, hands in her coat. "We changed the story," she said. "For today," he answered. "Tomorrow they'll try again." "But today," she said, "the town knows there were 2 killers." He nodded. "Now we make sure there are 2 arrests." The fog rolled in from the water, soft as gauze. Somewhere beyond it, a woman rehearsed a speech. Somewhere closer, another woman counted a rosary of pearl and gilt. And somewhere in the stacks of a small public library, the ghost of a stubborn sister finally closed her notebook and slept. Unmasking the murderer, twists that shocked Riverton. The courthouse steps hadn't cooled from the heat of Sullivan's public drop when Riverton shifted again. By morning, the headlines weren't whispers. They were fire. 2 women at the heart of Riverton murders. Forensics expose town's web of lies. Detective defies cover-up. Cable crews poured into the small town. Vans with satellite dishes blocked Main Street, their lenses hungry for Evelyn Whitmore's pearls and Margaret Hartman's broken mask. The town that had tried to bury its secrets was now a stage for the entire state. Inside the station, phones rang like alarms. Half the calls demanded Evelyn's arrest. The other half threatened Sullivan's life. Claudia sat at her desk, pale, chewing on the cap of her pen. "The DNA report is out there now, but it's going to get challenged. They'll say contamination. They'll say mislabeling. They'll say anything. They can say what they want, Sullivan replied. But truth has legs now, and it runs faster than lies when the crowd is watching. Lena paced. Then why do I feel like this isn't over? Margaret's ledger proves she paid to silence Emily. Evelyn's DNA ties her to Rachel. That should be enough. But something still feels missing. Sullivan didn't answer. He was staring at Emily's journals spread open on his desk. Her handwriting leaned heavy, pressed deep into the page as if she had been writing against time. The words on one page stopped him cold. If I die, it's not the end. They'll keep killing to make my murder disappear. Don't let them. That night, Margaret Hartman surrendered at the county jail, pearls traded for handcuffs. Cameras flashed as she was led inside, her eyes wild with rage. You think you're a hero, detective? She spat at Sullivan. You're a fool. You think I'm the only one who wanted her gone? Everyone wanted her gone. Emily was poison. She would have destroyed us all. Sullivan didn't respond. He only watched her vanish into the steel doors. But Evelyn remained free, her lawyers filing motions faster than the courts could read them. And each night she appeared on television, polished and calm. The truth will prevail, she told reporters, flipping Sullivan's own words back at him. I have faith in the system. Her confidence gnawed at him. Two days later, Claudia delivered the twist no one expected. I ran one more comparison, she said, sliding a new folder across the table. Rachel Carter's DNA under her nails wasn't just Evelyn's. It had a second partial profile, a familial overlap. A Whitmore, but not Evelyn. Lena frowned. The mayor? Claudia shook her head. Too degraded to confirm, but it's male. Could be James. Could be another relative. Someone close enough to mask behind her. The revelation sent shockwaves through the team. So Rachel may have been killed by Evelyn and someone else, Lena whispered. Sullivan lit a cigarette, the flame briefly lighting his tired eyes. Or Evelyn didn't act alone, which means her whole performance might be a smokescreen, not just for herself, but for her family. So that night, Sullivan staked out the Whitmore residence. He watched as Evelyn and James argued on the balcony, their voices faint but sharp. Evelyn's hands cut through the air like blades. James slumped in a chair, staring into a glass of whiskey. Then Sullivan saw it. James grabbed Evelyn's wrist, pulling her close, and she froze. For a moment, her calm broke, her eyes wide with something Sullivan had never seen in her. Fear. Lena whispered from the passenger seat. Maybe she's not the only Whitmore pulling strings. Sullivan said nothing. He just kept watching as the lights went out one by one, leaving the mansion in darkness. The next morning, Sarah Hartman broke her silence. She arrived at the station unannounced, eyes ringed with exhaustion. I'll testify, she said simply. Emily deserves that much. She gave her statement under oath. Margaret had confessed to arranging Emily's death. Evelyn had visited the Hartman estate days later, warning them to keep quiet or risk the rest of the family's safety. Sarah's voice shook as she recounted every detail, but she didn't stop. When she finished, Sullivan asked, "Why now?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Because I heard Evelyn say it herself on TV. The truth will prevail. If she means it, then so do I." Her testimony sealed Margaret's fate, but it also tightened the noose around Evelyn, who continued to insist her hands were clean. That evening, a fire broke out at the courthouse evidence storage. Flames devoured half the room before firefighters contained it. The box containing Claudia's override logs was reduced to ash, She called Sullivan in tears. "They're erasing the trail again. If the jury doesn't trust my testimony, it's my word against theirs." Sullivan felt the weight of it crushing him. "Then we stop chasing paper and start chasing flesh," he said. "We catch them in the act." The next night, Sullivan set a trap. He leaked word through the same gossip chain he'd used before. Emily's remaining journals were being moved from the library to federal custody. The rumor spread like fire through dry grass. He and Lena watched from an unmarked car as the courthouse basement doors creaked open near midnight. A shadow slipped inside, then another. Through the scope of the borrowed rifle, Sullivan saw them clearly, Evelyn Whitmore and her husband, James. Both carrying gloves, both carrying fire accelerant. Lena's voice shook. "She's not just the cover-up, she's the arsonist." Sullivan steadied his breathing. "And now we've got them." He raised his camera, clicking shot after shot. The flash never fired, but the truth was captured in every frame. By dawn, Sullivan had sent the photos to Agent Monroe. At 9 a.m., the FBI raided City Hall. Evelyn and James were taken out in matching handcuffs, their composure finally cracked. The town gathered to watch, their whispers rising into cheers. Riverton had seen many funerals, but this moment felt like resurrection. Sullivan stood on the courthouse steps, cigarette lit, Lena beside him. "You think this ends it?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Truth doesn't end stories, it just writes new ones, and in Riverton there's always another chapter." The booking room smelled like bleach and bravado. Evelyn Whitmore sat straight-backed at the metal table, wrists cuffed, pearls removed, composure intact. Across the hall, James hunched into himself, a man who looked smaller without a podium. Sullivan stood between rooms, listening to two different versions of Control unravel. "You've made a spectacle of grief," Evelyn said when he entered. "A detective addicted to true crime headlines. Enjoy your moment. It will starve." "It's not a headline," he replied. "It's a record, and records outlive speeches." She smiled. "Records are curated. Curators are replaceable." He left her with a pen she couldn't use and walked to James. The mayor stared at his knuckles like they might tell him what to say. "She told me it was containment," James whispered. "Not murder, containment. We protect Riverton from itself." His laugh cracked into something that wasn't laughter. "I believed her. I was good at ribbon cuttings and permission slips. She was good at everything that required nerve." Sullivan said nothing. Silence sometimes pushed truth farther than questions. James filled it. "Rachel Carter came to the house. She had a file. She said she'd go public. Evelyn asked me to talk to her just to calm her down, just to hold her hands. I did." He swallowed, jaw trembling. "Evelyn did the rest." "Say it plain," Sullivan said. "She strangled her," James whispered. "I held Rachel still." The words hit the air like a confession and a curse. In the corridor, Lena closed her eyes and kept breathing. Claudia, listening from a bench, stapled her fear to a form. "What about the lab tampering?" Sullivan asked. "Philip did what he was told," James said. "Evelyn told him what the town needed. He liked being necessary." "And the blackout at the gala?" James blinked. "You already know the answer." Sullivan left him to a paper cup and a paper conscience, then returned to Evelyn. "Your husband is talking," he said. "He always talks," she replied. "He mistakes noise for courage." "He says you killed Rachel," Sullivan said. "He says he held her while you did it." Evelyn tilted her head, studying the detective like a riddle. "People say many things when they fear prison. They even remember wrong. You also tried to burn the courthouse last night." I took a walk, she said. My husband enjoys night drives. Agent Monroe has your walk on a warrant. Agent Monroe, she repeated as if savoring the syllables. Federal men adore clean endings. This won't give him one. Then give me the beginning, Sullivan said. Start with Emily. Emily Hartman? Evelyn's smile thinned. I didn't kill her. I didn't need to. That family did my work for me. He didn't let the victory show. Who? Ask the Pearls, she said. They never leave the parlor. He left her there, polished, poisonous, and found his way back to the board in the squad room. Murders, methods, money. Every string now pointed to two names so common they felt mythic. Mother and wife. Small-town corruption didn't need a syndicate. It needed a family and a speechwriter. By afternoon, the grand jury clerk called. Margaret had arrived with counsel, pale and furious. Sarah's sworn statement waited in a sealed envelope. Claudia stood in the hall with a banker's box and a motel-strength resolve. Sullivan took the box and nodded at her. We're not curators, he said. We're locksmiths. Inside the grand jury room, the questions were clean. Chain of custody. Original versus altered. DNA probabilities. Claudia testified without flourish, each answer a nail. When she finished, the foreperson asked, And you're certain about the partial Whitmore profile under Rachel Carter's nails? Yes, Claudia said. It matches Evelyn fully and overlaps a male Whitmore relative partially. Thank you, the foreperson said. Courage noted. Sullivan stepped into the corridor and found Margaret waiting on a bench, pearls in her palm like prayer beads. Her attorney whispered strategy. She waved him off and looked at Sullivan with eyes that had rehearsed every expression except the truth. I didn't put my hands on Emily, she said quietly. Not mine. You paid for the hands, he replied. Retainers, weekly, coded as garden. She stared at the floor. Emily forgot the rules. She thought exposing Richard would cleanse us. She would have burned Daniel, burned Sarah, burned me. I did what mothers do. Mothers don't hire stranglers, he said. She didn't flinch. We hire solutions. Name him, Sullivan said. She closed her fingers around the pearls until the string cut skin. Rafe Nolan, she whispered. Your arc a contractor, discreet. East fence, not west. I told Emily to meet her father. I told Rafe to meet Emily. The hallway seemed to narrow. The initial that had haunted Emily's pages wasn't a brother or a husband. It was a blade with a billing address. Where is Nolan? Sullivan asked. Everywhere men like him are, she said. Inside a new name. Did Richard know? Margaret's mouth twisted. Richard knows how to sign checks. He doesn't ask what they purchase. The attorney tugged her sleeve. She rose and drifted toward the doors like a ghost ascending to a different kind of heaven. Lena joined Sullivan by the soda machine, eyes wide. R finally has a face. Find it, he said. They worked Nolan from rumor into record, old permits, subcontractor lists. A citation for unlicensed security work 3 towns over. A grainy DMV photo that could have been any man built to pass through crowds. Mr. Alvarez remembered seeing someone matching the build near the school weeks before Emily died. The librarian remembered nothing and remembered that too loudly. Agent Monroe pushed the name through federal databases and came back with a wire-thin thread. Rafe Nolan, alias Ray Noakes, alias RN Service, an interstate courier of difficult items. No warrants stuck. No fingerprints lived in polite places. You want him? Monroe said. You'll have to make him want you first. They didn't have time to set bait. That night, a note arrived at the station, typed on a library machine and folded into a county envelope. You found the talkers. Can you find the worker? East fence. Last time. A time followed 2 a.m. and a place, the garden lot. "It's a trap," Lena said. "Everything has been," Sullivan replied. They didn't go alone. Monroe's team took the north and west, local units the south. Sullivan and Lena walked the cracked pavement of the Hartman lot with their hands open and their pulses loud. A figure stepped into the sodium light, broad-shouldered, ordinary, the kind of man buildings ignore. He held no weapon visible, just a contractor's clipboard. His voice was flat. "You made this messy." "You were paid to make it clean," Sullivan said. "Clean is expensive," the man replied. "She paid on time." "Margaret," Lena said. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. "I don't do messages," he added. "Just jobs." "Emily begged," Sullivan said. "She argued," the man corrected, as if grammar absolved him. Monroe moved first, a quiet rush of dark jackets. The man ran like a man who'd practiced running. He hit the fence at the east side, hands up, feet finding chain link like rungs. A taser snapped white. He fell, hard enough to crack breath. Cuffs clicked. The night exhaled. "Rafe Nolan," Monroe said, reading an ID that might hold for a week. "You're under arrest for murder for hire and anything else that sticks." The man stared at Sullivan without heat. "You caught a tool," he said. "The hand still writes." "The hand is in a cell," Sullivan replied. "Two of them." Back at the station, Sarah slept on a church pew they'd borrowed. Claudia dozed against her box, and the coffee tasted like a night that had forgotten morning. Sullivan pinned Nolan's printout to the board beneath Margaret's ledger. The pattern didn't look like a serial killer anymore. It looked like a crime thriller told in two dialects: family and regime. Lena rubbed her temples. "We have both killers now. The murder mystery is solved. So why does it feel like the story's still moving?" "Because truth keeps its receipts," Sullivan said. "And people who live on speeches always keep one more." He glanced toward Evelyn's holding cell. She sat awake, eyes bright, as if she were listening to a tune only she could hear. The system would grind her slowly. She knew how to grind back. Somewhere a judge owed a favor. Somewhere a donor dialed a number. Somewhere a courier carried an envelope that said emergency fund. Sullivan dialed Pastor Cole instead. "Keep the side door unlocked," he said. "This town's going to need a place to breathe." Pastor Cole's voice was a tired amen. "I'm lighting the candles already." When dawn finally bled into the blinds, Riverton wasn't safe and it wasn't finished, but it was awake. And in a town that had learned to walk with shadows, waking was the first dangerous, necessary crime. But the darkness of Riverton was just the beginning. The numbers whispered louder, the shadows grew bolder, and the truth waited just out of reach. This is not the end. It's only the first half of the nightmare. Join us in part 2, where the secrets will finally come undone, if you dare. Don't forget to subscribe to Dark Pulse, hit the bell icon, and share your thoughts below. What do you think is waiting in the shadows of part 2?